welcome to the channel. If you enjoy captivating stories and intriguing content, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe so you never miss an update. Also, drop a comment below telling me where you're watching from. I love seeing the amazing places our community comes from. Thanks for being here, and let's dive in. The gleaming headquarters on Page Mill Road looked like any other tech temple in Palo Alto. Tinted windows, white oak reception desk, a wall of flat screens scrolling abstractions of data. To passing motorists, it was another startup making the world better. Yet behind those windows, a single glass drop of blood, smaller than a raindrop, larger than a promise, held the company's fate. For 4 years, the firm's founder, a soft-voiced woman in a black turtleneck, had repeated the same refrain. Revolutionary blood tests from a finger prick, hundreds of analyses within minutes, all at a fraction of the cost. Investors nodded, regulators hesitated, and patients, desperate for answers, rolled up their sleeves. Her name, Elizabeth, carried the hush of royalty, and in Silicon Valley royalty was measured not in lineage but in valuation. By late 2014, her company touched $9 billion on the private market. Former secretaries of state joined her board, wearing lanyards that read integrity first. Journalists declared her the next Jobs. She lowered her voice an octave on stage, like a conjurer about to reveal the machine that would upend medicine. The device itself hid behind frosted glass panels. If visitors pressed too close, a handler in a navy blazer appeared and guided them away, murmuring something about proprietary architecture. In Arizona, where statewide contracts rolled forward faster than legislation, pharmacists slid the fingerstick kits across shiny counters. Elderly customers followed the pamphlet's illustrations, hopeful they'd never again endure a phlebotomist's needle. The sample, a single crimson bead, dropped into a microvial branded with a scarlet teardrop. Couriers rushed the vials to a desert warehouse humming with refrigerated chambers, robotic arms, and somewhere deep inside, the company's secret analyzer codenamed Edison. Employees signed non-disclosure agreements thick as phone books. Some wore bright wristbands that flashed red if they crossed into restricted corridors. Yet the miracle never quite materialized. Data sheets arrived blurred with mathematical corrections. The control charts wobbled like kites in strong wind. When engineers asked why Edison's sodium readings contradicted hospital labs, they were told the hospital equipment must be wrong. Reagent cartridges jammed, pipettes miscalibrated themselves, and still the slide decks boasted 99.9% accuracy. One biochemist taped a hidden list of unfixable errors inside a desk drawer. Hemolysis at low volumes, temperature drift, cross-contamination. She resigned after 2 months, unsettled by the widening gap between the truth in the lab and the story on CNBC. The founder countered every doubt with icy calm. Employees who raised alarms found security badges deactivated by morning. A British whistleblower in his 20s typed a memo titled, "Essay Unreliability," and mailed it to federal inspectors. The company traced the print job, hauled him into a frosted conference room, demanded silence. He left the building feeling both victorious and terrified, the memo's carbon copy tucked under his jacket. At night he phoned his grandfather, a former board member, and confessed that customers might receive dangerously false results. The old man listened, then sighed, "Truth has a long arc, kid. Stay steady." Meanwhile, the founder staged media photographs beside gleaming robots that, in reality, were seldom used. Sleek Edison boxes sat unplugged, covered by lint-free cloths, while technicians ran blood into modified Siemens analyzers, machines the company publicly mocked as obsolete. The switch was called Nova Fallback in internal emails. When a data auditor asked why legacy machines handled 90% of tests, a vice president replied, "We're in transition." The auditor's report disappeared into a drawer. The unraveling began, as unravelings often do, with a single question published in a paper no one at headquarters had time to read. Why are Theranos results excluded from peer-reviewed comparison studies? A Wall Street Journal reporter saw the footnote, felt the tingle of potential scandal, and started dialing former staffers. Doors that once slammed shut now opened a crack. Anxious voices spoke of test runs after midnight, vials diluted beyond scientific sense, managers praying the numbers would miraculously align. The reporter's article landed like a harpoon, major shortcomings at blood test startup. The next morning the lobby seemed colder, the tinted windows darker. Regulators arrived unannounced, notebooks in hand. They asked to witness a routine vitamin D test, from sample to printout. A trembling technician drew blood from a volunteer, loaded the cartridge, and waited. The Edison unit shuddered, beeped, displayed an error. 30 minutes later, a mislabeled readout emerged. The regulators exchanged a glance, neither hostile nor friendly, simply patient. They requested historical accuracy logs. The logs were being consolidated. They asked for raw data. The files needed reindexing. They scheduled a return visit. Investors, spooked by the headlines, demanded an all-hands meeting. The founder strode on stage, black turtleneck immaculate, eyes unblinking under studio lights. She insisted the technology worked, that critics misunderstood, that the press sought only sensation. Slides projected growth curves soaring toward the ceiling. She spoke of destiny, disruption, democratization of healthcare. For a moment the crowd fell under the old spell, then a hand rose in the back row. A soft-spoken analyst asked, "Can you share the validation studies?" The pause that followed was a chasm. The answer, another promise of soon, felt like a verdict. Subpoenas bloomed like desert flowers after rain. The Securities and Exchange Commission pressed for financial statements. The numbers revealed revenue scarcely above neighborhood clinics. Walgreens suspended testing, leaving Arizona customers clutching voided reports. Lawsuits piled up. In a quiet conference room at Sand Hill Road, a venture capitalist tore his investment memo in half, as though shredding paper could erase due diligence he never performed. By late 2018, the company was a husk. Employees packed personal items into cardboard boxes. The Edison units hauled away for evidence. The founder, once compared to titans, now faced federal charges of wire fraud. She walked past cameras without the confident stride, clutching a Navy folder as if it contained a different ending. In court, prosecutors sketched the arc of deception. Hollow prototypes, doctored demos, patients misled. Jurors listened, neither dazzled nor vindictive, merely sober. On the evening the verdict arrived, guilty on multiple counts. The desert warehouse stood silent, refrigerated chambers empty. The promise of a painless future had evaporated, leaving behind blistering lessons on charisma, wishful belief, and the high cost of ignoring the quiet scientist in the back row who whispers, "The data are wrong." As the lights dimmed in that once gleaming headquarters, a lone security guard walked the corridor where frosted panels once hid the miracle machine. He paused, imagining the single drop of blood at the story's center, still glistening in the mind's eye, a reminder that in science, as in finance, glass promises shatter without warning, and truth, patient and persistent, eventually steps into the light. Munich at dusk can feel monastic, pin-neat streets, the smell of malt from breweries downstream, church towers tinting gold as the Isar slips past. On a late June evening in 2020, commuters glanced up at the glass cube on Einstein Ring that housed Wirecard AG, a payments firm once hailed as Germany's digital champion. Banks of LEDs still glowed behind the facade, but inside, auditors were tearing through cabinets, hunting for something that had never quite existed. 1.9 billion euros said to be resting in Asian escrow accounts. The company's ascent had been brisk. Founded in 1999 to process online gambling payments, Wirecard reinvented itself after the dot-com crash as the pipes behind e-commerce. By 2018 it displaced Commerzbank on Frankfurt's blue-chip DAX index, a rocket among staid continental lenders. Journalists printed the phrase German PayPal, and CEOs from Stuttgart to Seoul boasted of partnering with the Bavarian Wunderkind. Markus Braun, the Austrian-born chief executive, cultivated a monk's aura. Shaved head, black turtleneck, quiet voice that leaned on words like vision and ecosystem. Investors loved the discipline. He spoke of frictionless global payments, AI-driven credit, an end to cash itself. Each quarter, numbers exceeded expectations. Revenue soared, margins stayed improbably fat. Analysts ran out of superlatives and defaulted to price targets. Where Braun projected serenity, his chief operating officer, Jan Marsalek, radiated urgency. Tall, charming, equal parts raconteur and phantom, Marsalek hopped time zones like stepping stones. One week he posed with dignitaries in Singapore, the next he inspected data centers in Manila, always promising fresh troves of transactions handled on Wirecard's third-party acquirer network. Few outside the company quite grasped how that network worked. Even fewer could name its partner banks in the Philippines where vast client funds supposedly rested. In April 2015, a short seller circulated a memo questioning Wirecard's books. Duplicated revenue lines, curious partner entities in Dubai. The board dismissed it as market manipulation. The Bavarian regulator, BaFin, not only backed management but temporarily banned shorting the stock. For skeptics, this was gasoline on flame. Why defend a firm so fiercely if the numbers spoke for themselves? Inside headquarters, dissent rarely found oxygen. Accountants who probed reconciliation gaps were told the data sat abroad, delayed by time zone lag. When a controller suggested booking provisional impairments, he was reassigned to a side project involving loyalty cards. Employees learned the first rule of Einstein ring: trust the figures provided by group treasury, and never chase the line items too hard. Bonuses, stock options, and the lure of a European tech fairy tale kept most eyes forward. The facade began to flake in early 2019 when the Financial Times published a series titled House of Wirecard. Reporters obtained internal spreadsheets showing circular cash flows, contracts signed after revenue had allegedly been earned, and partners linked to P.O. boxes. Wirecard's response was surgical outrage. It hired private investigators, sued the newspaper, and accused anonymous traders of conspiring to destroy German innovation. Yet each rebuttal spawned new leaks, as if the company's walls had grown porous in the night. KPMG entered as special auditor, tasked with silencing doubts. Months passed. Deadlines slipped. When the report arrived in April 2020, it read like winter fog. No definitive proof of wrongdoing, but glaring gaps where documents had been unavailable. Braun declared victory, the share price bounced. Marsalek scheduled another Asia tour. Still, the missing escrow confirmations nagged at Ernst & Young, the statutory auditors who could not sign the annual report without verifying cash. They requested a simple letter from the Philippine banks. What arrived instead was a pair of PDFs bearing pixelated logos and identical typos. A compliance officer at BDO Unibank took one look and replied, "These certificates are spurious." Within hours, phones at the Munich headquarters rang on repeat. The 1.9 billion euros, nearly all of Wirecard's reported cash, did not exist. The board met at dawn behind drawn blinds. Braun paced, repeating that there must be a technical error, perhaps accounts frozen in transit. Marsalek joined via video from Manila, claimed he would visit the trustee in person. He never made the appointment. That night, he vanished, last recorded boarding a private jet to Minsk, then slipping across an unmarked border. Thursday, June 25th. Wirecard filed for insolvency, the first DAX member ever to do so. Outside, curious onlookers gathered, holding smartphones like lanterns. Employees exited the lobby clutching laptops and houseplants, their badges already deactivated. Some wept. Others stared hollow-eyed at news tickers reporting a 10 billion euro evaporation. Investigators traced the fraud back through a lattice of shelf companies: Alalam Solutions in Dubai, Payeezy in Manila, Card Systems in Singapore. Revenues had been booked on pages no regulator had inspected, then laundered through sham transactions until distinctions between sales and loans blurred into smoke. CFOs at client firms received glossy dashboards proving volumes that never settled in their own merchant accounts. They assumed timing quirks. Wirecard assured them of currency holidays and regional banking delays. In a Munich holding cell, Braun finally conceded what the balance sheet now screamed. Without the imaginary billions, Wirecard had been insolvent for years. He insisted, however, that Marsalek orchestrated the falsified confirmations. Prosecutors nodded but pressed harder. Why approve statements he never verified? Braun's shoulders fell as if the black turtleneck itself could no longer sustain the myth. Around Europe the fallout rippled, pension funds nursing losses, lawmakers grilling regulators on conflicts of interest. BaFin's chairman admitted the watchdog had spent more energy policing journalists than examining Wirecard's ledgers. Confidence in German corporate governance, once steel-clad, now showed hairline fractures. The scandal became bedtime reading for finance students, a parable of due diligence ignored under the spell of exponential charts. As for Marsalek, sightings flickered like ghost lights. A safe house near Moscow, paramilitary training grounds in Libya, encrypted messages boasting of new ventures in digital currencies. International warrants followed, but the trail grew cold. His name settled into European lore beside Meyer Lansky and the Man in the Iron Mask. Proof that, occasionally, a con artist can still elude a continent wired with cameras. On the banks of the Isar, the glass cube remains. Stripped of logos, it now leases space to biotech startups and cloud consultancies, tenants who pass a bronze plaque listing former Wirecard directors. Every evening, cleaners wipe fingerprints from the doors, unaware that below their feet once lay servers humming with phantom payments. The scandal's moral lingers in the Munich air. In an age of instant data, the simplest audit question, "Show me the cash," can still unravel an empire built on numbers no bank ever held. The elevator to the 17th floor of Lipstick Building opened with a soft chime, releasing a hush rather than bustle. Beyond a glass wall sat Bernard L. Madoff Investment Securities, a suite trimmed in cream carpeting and low lighting that felt more like a private library than a trading shop. Visitors noticed the absence of ringing phones, the gentle clack of a single-dot matrix printer, and the maitre d'-like receptionist who offered espresso in porcelain cups. Behind this serenity, Bernie Madoff, silver hair immaculate, wire-rimmed spectacles reflecting no emotion at all, managed what his devotees called the black box, a strategy so steady it seemed immune to storms that rattled Wall Street. For nearly 2 decades, the returns arrived like clockwork, around 1% a month, a bit more in rising markets, a bit less when indices plunged. Private bankers from Geneva and fund managers from Palm Beach whispered Madoff's name to select clients. He doesn't advertise. He chooses you. Allocations were capped, statements hand-delivered, questions brushed aside with grandfatherly charm. Bernie teased skeptics. If it's so unbelievable, keep your money elsewhere. Most nodded, embarrassed to doubt a past chairman of NASDAQ who dined at the finest tables and donated to hospitals. The secret sat on the 23rd floor, sealed behind a keycard door labeled private. There, a handful of programmers and clerks worked on ancient IBM AS/400 computers, entering trades that never happened. At day's end, they printed account statements on continuous green and white paper, tore the perforations, and dropped envelopes down to the 17th floor, where they were mailed to investors. The trades depicted a strategy called split-strike conversion, but no tickets existed at the depository trust. The profits came from a simpler source, new money flowing in the front door to cover redemptions at the back. Through the 1990s, skepticism flickered yet never caught fire. A Boston analyst, Harry Markopolos, reverse-engineered the numbers and concluded the strategy was impossible. He sent memos to the Securities and Exchange Commission titled, "The World's Largest Ponzi Scheme." But the SEC, thinly staffed and cowed by Madoff's reputation, performed cursory visits. A few binders reviewed, a polite handshake, case closed. Bernie greeted examiners with Mets tickets and stories about market making in the 1980s. They left convinced if anything was amiss, it was minor. Meanwhile, the market's rhythms grew volatile. The dot-com bust of 2000 erased fortunes overnight, yet Madoff's statements still showed serene growth. In 2001, terrorism struck Lower Manhattan. Indices plummeted, but Madoff clients gained 0.5%. Some found the pattern eerie, like a candle that refuses to flicker in wind. But they loved the consistency more than they feared the asymmetry. His inner circle called him Uncle Bernie. On Fridays he departed early for Montauk, sleeves rolled, smiling with neighbors on the dock. He bought lobster for fishermen who struggled to sell the day's catch, and he slipped tips to busboys before dessert arrived. At temple fundraisers he matched pledges 3-1. Elderly congregants thanked him with teary eyes and entrusted life savings to his care. He accepted with mild protest, as though doing them a burdensome favor. In early 2007, real estate cracks webbed across the American economy. Funds everywhere tightened. Madoff still paid out on schedule, but beneath the mahogany desk the arithmetic faltered. The feeder funds that funneled European capital, Tremont, Fairfield, Greenwich, Banco Santander, slowed their inflows. Redemptions crept higher. For the first time in decades, the gap between requests and deposits widened into a canyon. September 2008 arrived like a tidal wave. Lehman Brothers collapsed, equity markets convulsed, faith itself seemed to break its moorings. Investors sought cash, any cash, to cover margin calls. They rang Bernie's office. Polite assistants promised wire transfers first thing tomorrow. He approved each with a fountain pen that felt heavier by the day. At night he stared through his penthouse window over Central Park, the city lights trembling like distant fires. On the morning of December 9, his sons Mark and Andrew entered the apartment to hear a confession that landed like lead. Bernie told them, in the flat voice of a man already elsewhere, "It's all just one big lie." They pressed for details. He gave a number, $50 billion. The scheme was insolvent. There was, in truth, only a few $100 million left. He proposed a final round of bonuses to loyal staff. Get them squared away for Christmas. The brothers, stunned, contacted an attorney. 2 days later, the FBI knocked on the 17th floor door. Bernie sat behind his desk, shoulders relaxed, as if waiting for an overdue appointment. An agent asked whether there was an innocent explanation for the missing billions. Bernie replied, "There is no innocent explanation." Handcuffs clicked. Employees peered over cubicle walls to see their patriarch let out with coat draped over manacled wrists. The unraveling was swift, merciless. Statements once believed sacred were exposed as fiction. Charities closed their doors. Retirees returned to work as greeters at discount stores. One investor, having lost family legacies built over a century, compared the betrayal to waking from a dream and finding the house gone. Courts appointed a trustee, Irving Picard, who traced funds through shell entities, clawing back proceeds from yacht dealers, art brokers, even distant cousins. Each check reclaimed felt like a pebble against a mountain. In June 2009, in a silent courtroom overlooking the East River, Bernard Madoff faced sentencing. He read a brief apology, voice wavering only once. The judge replied that the calculated cruelty of the scheme required the maximum, 150 years. Spectators gasped, though they expected nothing less. The gavel fell. Outside, the summer air pressed hot against stone facades while reporters jostled for angles of a black sedan moving toward federal prison. In the years that followed, cautionary tales multiplied, but none captured the eerie calm of those 17th-floor offices, where silence and steady numbers lulled the wise and the wealthy. The legacy lives not in spreadsheets but in the lesson whispered across trading desks and coffee houses. Whenever returns look velvet smooth against the chaos of the world, someone, somewhere, may be knitting illusions in a quiet room behind a locked door. Cambridge's Science Park wakes in low fog, glass cubes and bicycle lanes appearing like sketches on damp paper. In one corner stands a matte black building with tinted windows shaped like a chess rook. The plaque reads Autonomy Corporation plc, though most locals simply call it the machine that listens. Inside, racks of servers hum in chilled rooms, devouring emails, phone calls, and medical scans, translating chaotic data into patterns. At least, that is the legend repeated from college pubs to venture capital boardrooms. Its creator, a mathematician named Mike Lynch, nurtured the myth with boyish excitement. He spoke of meaning-based computing, software that could understand human language the way humans do. By 2009, Autonomy's revenue chart shot upward like a cathedral spire, twin pillars labeled idle and digital audio mining. Journalists crowned Lynch Europe's answer to Steve Jobs, noting the genes, the permanent half-smile, the refusal to explain precisely how Autonomy recognized sarcasm in a voicemail or fear in a bank's call center transcript. Investors did not demand proof. The share price supplied enough comfort. What they did not see was the conveyor belt in the finance office, where invoices from tiny resellers arrived minutes before quarter end, stamped software license and booked as full revenue. Many of the customers were startups with no cash. Autonomy quietly lent them money through back-to-back deals disguised as marketing agreements. On paper, the purchase paid for itself immediately. In reality, the same pound coin traveled in a circle and returned home wearing a different hat. The numbers dazzled larger prey. In Palo Alto, Hewlett-Packard hunted for acquisitions that would recast the aging hardware maker as a software powerhouse. Executive suites buzzed. Autonomy offered margins north of 40% and growth in double digits. Metrics HP itself had not tasted in years. Due diligence teams flew to Cambridge, strolling alongside ponds where coots slept under reeds. Lynch greeted them with espresso and a live demo. Type blue bottle and sand into idle, and within seconds, images of cobalt medicine vials buried in Iraq's desert flickered on a screen. The Americans exchanged impressed glances. None asked whether the pictures had been pre-indexed. In August 2011, HP announced the deal. $11 billion in cash, a 64% premium. British tabloids cheered the homegrown unicorn. Lynch pocketed hundreds of millions overnight but told reporters he remained a humble engineer. Behind closed doors he handed out bottles of champagne wrapped in binary printed ribbon, quoting Churchill about expansion across the Atlantic. Staff toasted, then returned to keyboards, where they faced an awkward new reality. HP's accountants required far more granularity than London stock analysts ever had. Almost immediately the seams split. HP controllers opened folders labeled hardware pass-through and found shipments of Dell servers sold at cost. Nothing to do with linguistic analytics, yet recorded as high-margin software. They examined a deal with Invoke Bahrain worth $6 million. The invoice bore yesterday's date, but the customer's purchase order was blank. Asked for proof of delivery, Autonomy sales director pointed to a PDF. 3 pages, all identical, the signature box empty. After the meeting he whispered to a colleague, "We'll clean it up next quarter." Emails surfaced where the chief financial officer, Seshovan Hussain, urged staff to accelerate deferred revenue and find extra deals, creative or otherwise. The language, while not overtly criminal, hinted at a game the new owners did not wish to play. HP's audit committee grew uneasy. The board hired forensic accountants from Deloitte and KPMG. They spent nights in glass-walled war rooms pouring tea over spreadsheets, tracing revenue lines that began in Cambridge, looped through offshore shell companies in the Cayman Islands, and ended in empty lots outside Vienna. On November 20, 2012, HP stunned markets with an $8.8 billion write-down, blaming serious accounting improprieties at Autonomy. The press release landed at dawn in London, lunchtime in Palo Alto, midnight in Sydney. Wherever it hit, it detonated. HP's share price fell 12%. Lynch fired back with a 14-page rebuttal accusing HP of destroying shareholder value to mask its own failings. TV anchors framed the clash as a transatlantic tragedy, British genius versus Silicon Valley bungling. But investigators kept digging. They discovered reciprocal transactions. Autonomy bought marketing services from a reseller for $10 million, then sold the same reseller $10 million in software the next day. Cash never left the bank, only the invoice numbers changed. They found emails scheduling deals on the final day of a quarter, timestamps reading 2357, subject line, "Don't worry about payment." And they found a warehouse in Belgium stacked with unsold servers, hardware parked so it could be recognized as revenue, gathering dust beside disused forklifts. Criminal charges followed. Hussain was tried in San Francisco, convicted of wire fraud, and sentenced to prison. Lynch fought extradition for years, arguing British civil courts should handle the matter. American prosecutors insisted the fraud's victims were U.S. investors who relied on New York-listed HP. In London's Royal Courts of Justice, a judge methodically recited 1,500 paragraphs concluding Lynch had masterminded the deception. The courtroom air felt old and dry, yet the words carried electric weight. False accounting, dishonest, inflated revenues by up to 35%. Back in Cambridge, the matte black building still stands, now occupied by a biotech startup researching gene therapy for rare cancers. The servers are gone, replaced by centrifuges humming softer than hard drives ever did. Bicyclists glide past without glancing up. The saga feels like yesterday's fog, dense when inside it, invisible once it lifts. Yet a lesson clings to the glass. When figures rise too neatly, too quickly, and too often at midnight, the data itself may be whispering a different story, one not of meaning but of make-believe. Houston's skyline blazed silver in the Texas sun, but one tower gleamed brightest. Enron Center South, 30-something stories of blue glass that mirrored the Gulf's restless weather. Every morning, badge readers clicked as traders in khaki slacks and starched shirts filed into the sixth-floor Global Strategies room, a chamber the size of a tennis court where the electricity market was said to bend to human will. Huge plasma screens glowed with tickers. Megawatts priced like pork bellies, natural gas contracts scrolling in neon green. Visitors felt they were stepping aboard a spaceship fueled by math and swagger. Jeffrey Skilling, the company's boyish president, moved through the rows like a football coach, patting shoulders, firing off questions about spreads between Palo Verde and the Four Corners hub. His mantra, asset-light, information-rich, echoed in slide decks from Wall Street to Wharton. Enron, he said, wasn't just buying and selling electrons, it was arbitraging volatility. Analysts nodded, intoxicated by a business they barely grasped but trusted because the quarterly numbers rose faster than Texan thunderstorms. Standing slightly apart was Andy Fasto, the chief financial officer with a banker's hairline and a risk-taker's grin. Fasto spoke softly, almost tenderly, about liquidity solutions, synthetic partnerships with names that sounded like country lanes. LJM, Raptor, Chuco. Few in the building understood their mechanics, but they knew the acronyms reduced debt and smoothed earnings, which fed the share price, which in turn fed bonuses. The stock, once a sleepy pipeline utility, now traded like a dot-com rocket, splitting 3 times in 2 years. Back on the trading floor, a practice called mark-to-market reigned. At 10 a.m., a newly inked 20-year power contract was booked not at today's revenue but at the present value of every projected profit. Sometimes hundreds of millions recognized the instant and in turn clicked enter. If a model spit out a number the desk disliked, assumptions were tweaked, demand curves nudged higher, discount rates eased. Skilling told one young analyst, "Think about it, value is what you convince someone else it is." The analyst scribbled that sentence on a yellow post-it and taped it to his monitor like scripture. Yet the real crucible lay farther west, along the ragged coastline of California. Deregulation had unbundled power generation from distribution, unleashing Enron's traders to buy capacity, reroute megawatts, and sell them back at markups that made local utilities gasp. They coined strategies with locker room humor. Death Star, Fat Boy, Ricochet. In one, power was scheduled to exit the grid for a split second, qualifying for an out-of-state premium, then instantly re-entered, never leaving California at all. Rolling blackouts darkened San Jose neighborhoods. Grandmothers fanned themselves on porches while Enron dialed up bids, capturing tens of millions in a single afternoon. When a regional operator begged for relief, a trader laughed into his headset, "Tell Grandma to buy candles." Even these gusher profits, however, could not mask a widening chasm on the balance sheet. Asset-light dreams still required hard infrastructure. Fiber networks, water ventures, a half-built power plant in Dabhol, India. Cash bled, liabilities swelled. Fasto's solution was baroque. He created special-purpose entities that bought Enron's underperforming assets using funds borrowed against Enron stock itself. Because the partnerships were independent, their debt stayed off the parents' books, and Enron booked a sale at full value, recording yet more income. The circularity was dizzying, but outside auditors at Arthur Andersen signed off, soothed by consulting fees and complex legal opinions. Whispers leaked nevertheless. Short sellers scanned footnotes and smelled smoke. One hedge fund manager described Enron's cash flow as a mirage in a heat wave. In early 2001, an analyst on a conference call asked Skilling why the company wouldn't reveal basic segment details. Skilling, usually unflappable, snapped, "Because I don't want to," then muttered an expletive. The outburst rippled through trading desks. When a Wall Street darling loses composure, gravity may be near. That summer, CEO Ken Lay assured employees their retirement accounts, bulging with Enron shares, were safe, even as he quietly unloaded personal holdings. By August, Skilling resigned, citing personal reasons, leaving Lay to calm markets alone. In October, a former executive turned whistleblower, Sharon Watkins, delivered a memo warning that off-balance sheet deals could implode. Lay forwarded it to lawyers, but publicly he dismissed any danger. The share price, once above $90, slid below 30, then 15, then single digits. Halloween brought the first real fright. Enron restated 5 years of earnings, erasing nearly $600 million in profits. Credit agencies slashed ratings to junk. Counterparties demanded cash collateral Enron no longer possessed. Traders who once swaggered now watched clocks, hoping each hour would pass without another downgrade. On December 2, 2001, the company filed for Chapter 11, the largest bankruptcy in American history at the time. Its workforce of 20,000 left jobless, 401(k)s reduced to pennies. In congressional hearings, senators displayed blown-up emails where Fasto bragged about hooking auditors and internal lawyers. Lay, face drawn, insisted he'd been misled. Skilling invoked Fifth Amendment rights. Fasto, arrested, eventually struck a plea deal. Arthur Andersen, convicted of obstruction, disintegrated within months, its name becoming shorthand for captive auditing. The energy markets chastened, rewired disclosure rules, birthing what the world now knows as Sarbanes-Oxley. Today, Enron Center South hosts a different tenant, The lobby's silver logo is gone, but if one listens, echoes remain. The clatter of imaginary kilowatts, the thrum of models tuned to wishful inputs, the faint laughter of traders betting against grandma's light bulb. In Houston's humid evenings, office workers strolling past the plaza may pause, imagining the tower's glass still reflecting phantom power streams. The lesson etched in that blue facade is stark. When a company starts selling possibility itself, pricing tomorrow before today has settled, the lights can burn bright, right up until the grid goes dark. The winter fog that hangs over Italy's Po Valley gives Parma a muted elegance. Pastel palazzos fade into gray streets, church bells toll as though from another century. On Via Mantova, just outside the city walls, stood a low concrete campus bearing a cheerful orange logo, Parmalat. From those gates cartons of milk, bricks of cream and wedges of Parmesan shipped to 5 continents. Locals were proud to whisper that a company founded on cow's milk had grown into a global colossus worth billions. At the center of the swirl was Callisto Tanzi, a soft-spoken man with rimless glasses and the obliging smile of a beloved uncle. Tanzi preferred modest neckties and claimed to detest the limelight, yet he moved through boardrooms with the authority of a baron. In interviews he spoke of famiglia and tradizione, suggesting Parmalat's balance sheet was woven from the same fabric as Parma's Christmas creches. Investors liked the story almost as much as they liked the numbers. Quarter after quarter the company reported rising revenue, strong margins, and, most intriguing of all, cash reserves that seemed to grow faster than dairy demand could ever justify. Those reserves supposedly rested in a Bank of America account on the Cayman Islands, held by a Parmalat subsidiary named Bonlat. The figure appeared each year in the notes. $4 billion, later 5, then 7. Italian analysts nodded appreciatively, reassured that Tanzi's empire was fortified with liquid security. No one asked why a family-run dairy chose a Caribbean mailbox for its savings. Such inquiries felt rude, even unpatriotic. Behind the factory's stainless steel vats, however, accountants fought a losing battle with reality. Global expansion, Brazilian yogurt plants, Formula One sponsorships, a struggling TV network, drank cash faster than milk evaporates in summer heat. To fill the gap, the finance office constructed an elaborate Gioco di Specchi, hall of mirrors. Bonlat borrowed from friendly banks, then loaned the money back to Parmalat, which booked it as revenue from intercompany sales. When auditors requested statements, Parmalat faxed letters on Bank of America letterhead confirming the billions. The letters looked authentic. Auditors ticked the box. Another quarter closed in peace. Tanzi's right hand in finance, Fausto Tana, mastered the choreography. He spoke in rapid bursts, chain-smoked gitanes, and kept 2 spreadsheets, one for auditors, one for himself. When a coupon payment on a bond approached, Tana created a new shell in Luxembourg, shifted liabilities there, and issued press releases about strategic treasury optimization. His team called the routine Spalmer il debito, spreading the debt like mascarpone. The phrase raised nervous laughter but no formal objections. In December 2003, a young analyst at Merrill Lynch scrutinized a Parmalat bond prospectus and noticed that Bonlat, the Cayman subsidiary, reported annual sales of only $60 million, yet was said to hold more than $5 billion in cash. The mismatch felt impossible, like a village bakery claiming to store the Bank of Italy's gold in its basement. The analyst rang colleagues in Milan. Curiosity spread. Soon hedge funds in London began shorting Parmalat stock, betting that something sour lurked beneath the froth. Alarmed, Tanzi authorized a €150 million bond buyback to signal strength. To fund it he asked Bank of America for a comfort letter affirming Bonlat's balance. The bank replied that it had no relationship with Bonlat and never held the alleged billions. The fax reached Parma on a cold Friday afternoon. Tana stared at the page, ash gathering on his cuff, then locked himself in a conference room. By Monday newspapers carried the first whispers. Il Buco, the whole, might be larger than anyone dared imagine. Auditors from Grant Thornton rushed to Cayman only to find Bonlat's registered office was a shelf in a law firm's storeroom. Clerks produced a single thin binder of minutes, most unsigned. The auditors cabled Milan, "We can't locate the funds." Italian prosecutors opened an inquiry. Bailiffs raided Parmalat headquarters, seizing servers still warm from weekend maintenance scripts that had attempted to purge email trails. On December 19, 2003, Tansy gathered senior managers under the fluorescent lights of a canteen that suddenly felt cavernous. Voice trembling, he admitted the cash did not exist. One engineer dropped his plastic cup. Another covered her mouth, whispering "Mamma Mia." Outside, workers arriving for the night shift heard rumors and clustered in uneasy knots, unsure whether to clock in or go home. Rome's financial police swooped in before Christmas. They escorted Tansy from his villa, past cameras catching the moment a national patriarch turned mortal. In custody, he spoke of accounting creativity, insisting the plan had always been to refill the coffers once markets improved. Investigators tallied the damage: 14 billion euros missing, Europe's largest bankruptcy to date. Banks from Milan to Manhattan listed Parmalat bonds under distress. Pensioners who had trusted Tansy's television ads watched life savings curdle. Trial stretched for years. Tana cooperated, detailing fake transactions that looped through 8 jurisdictions and 23 shell companies named after classical composers. One PowerPoint slide displayed a flowchart so intricate the judge requested it printed as a mural. Tansy, convicted of fraud and sentenced to prison, maintained that he merely borrowed time, not money, and that global markets had punished him for ambition. The court disagreed. Today the factory gates on Via Mantova still open at dawn, now for a reorganized entity producing honest milk under new owners. Workers wear fresh uniforms. The orange logo remains, but the vibe is humbler, as if the building itself learned caution. Locals cycling past remember the night Parma's pride soured, and they repeat a proverb newly minted from the ordeal: "Ancha il latte più dolce più and male, even the sweetest milk can turn." The fog rolls in again, cloaking the past, yet the lesson lingers like the faint smell of whey. When cash is too abundant to taste, someone should lift the lid and test whether the cream is real or just froth caught in cold December air. The morning shift in Wolfsburg began the way it always had. Brake lights flickering outside Gate 17, the smell of roasted barley from a nearby bakery, and rows of workers in navy coveralls filing toward the world's largest automobile plant. On the western edge of the complex rose a building nicknamed the Ivory Tower, a stack of mirrored glass where senior engineers designed software no driver would ever see, but which, by 2007, had become the keystone of Volkswagen's future in America. Volkswagen craved the US market the way a desert craves rain. European diesels were efficient, yes, but American regulators demanded nitrogen oxide emissions so low they seemed almost theoretical. The company's hardware division proposed an expensive urea injection system. Accountants balked. Instead, a handful of programmers in the powertrain electronics group were told to find a clever solution. Germans have a word: Schummelsoftware, cheat software. No one uttered it aloud, but the mandate hung in the air. They built an algorithm hardly bigger than a lullaby. If the steering wheel stayed motionless, the engine ran at a laboratory setting: cool, clean, compliant. If the wheel budged more than a haircut's breadth, the program switched to road mode, granting torque and mileage Americans loved, while puffing out emissions up to 40 times the legal limit. The code carried an innocuous name: acoustic condition, as if it merely dampened cabin noise. Documentation used passive verbs and nested bullet points. Audits ticked the box: functional requirements satisfied. The cheat was elegant, invisible, and, everyone agreed, temporary just until real hardware caught up. Showroom launches followed. In Los Angeles, billboards boasted clean diesel. No compromises. Test drive weekends offered free lattes and branded tote bags. Customers who disliked hybrids found the alternative seductive. Leather seats, German handling, 50 miles per gallon. A New England biology teacher wrote thank you letters to VW, praising sustainable engineering. Behind the scenes, engineers joked about TDI pixie dust, laughter dampened by the fear that someone somewhere might someday test the cars while turning the wheel. That someone appeared in 2013 at West Virginia University, where a modest research grant funded a road emissions study. 2 graduate students attached portable analyzers to a Passat and a Jetta, then drove from San Diego to Seattle. Results veered into science fiction. The cars met federal limits in the lab yet spewed pollutants in real traffic at levels comparable to freight trucks. The students reran calibrations, suspecting instrument error. Numbers stayed monstrous. They forwarded findings to the California Air Resources Board, which called a meeting with Volkswagen. Representatives from Wolfsburg arrived in tailored suits, assuring regulators the anomaly was a technical oversight. They promised software updates. Months later, a new round of tests showed marginal improvement, not a cure. Emails pinged across continents. Engineers typed phrases like, "impossible to meet targets without risk," then clicked delete but not fast enough. Servers archived everything. September 2015, Frankfurt Auto Show. Amid champagne flutes and concept cars, U.S. officials delivered an ultimatum: confess or face a sales freeze. That Friday, in a glass-walled conference room overlooking the Mittelland Canal, a senior manager sighed and, according to minutes later leaked, muttered, "Let's tell them the truth." By Monday, Volkswagen issued a terse statement acknowledging irregularities affecting 11 million vehicles worldwide. Stock traders reacted first. Shares fell 30% in 2 days. Dealership phones rang off hooks. Bewildered owners asked whether they could legally drive to work. In a Detroit cul-de-sac, a family taped a handwritten sign to their diesel wagon: "Not as green as we hoped." Late-night comedians found punchlines in German precision. But inside Wolfsburg, the mood transcended embarrassment. It was existential dread. Workers feared layoffs, pensioners feared devalued stock, engineers feared prison. Investigations multiplied like cracks in ice. Internal auditors combed Git logs, tracing the cheat's birth to a line of code written 8 years earlier by an employee identified only as Person A. German prosecutors raided homes at dawn, confiscating laptops, notebooks, even post-it notes peeled from monitors. In Washington, congressional hearings featured diesel Jettas hoisted on hydraulic lifts as lawmakers demanded explanations. One committee member held up a child's inhaler, asking why corporate ambition had trumped public lungs. Eventually, the story crystallized. A culture obsessed with market share had cornered itself. Each quarter's presentation touted clean diesel growth, leaving no room for rewind. Engineers who questioned feasibility received curt emails: "Targets are given, not debated." The defeat device was not a single villain's brainstorm but a collective shrug that settled into routine, ethical fatigue disguised as technical ingenuity. Settlements arrived like winter storms. Volkswagen pled guilty to conspiracy to defraud the United States, agreed to pay more than $20 billion in buybacks and environmental funds, and funded charging stations for the very electric cars it once scorned. In German court, the former CEO claimed ignorance. Judges raised eyebrows at his handwritten notes referencing steering angle criteria. Middle managers served short sentences. A few fled to countries without extradition treaties. The Powertrain Electronics Group was dissolved, its offices repurposed for battery development teams. Today, visitors to Wolfsburg can tour the Transparency Factory, a glass plant where electric ID models glide along silent tracks. Guides speak of a new chapter. Yet in a quiet corridor, a plaque lists past milestones, among them the year 2015, described only as reorientation. Employees pass quickly, eyes forward. At shift's end they cycle home along the canal, where evening mist mingles with the memory of invisible smoke. The lesson lingers like diesel odor on a cold morning. A deception measured in lines of code can travel continents, pollute skies, and corrode trust far faster than any car can accelerate. And in every ivory tower where targets outpace physics, the Wolfsburg saga whispers a warning. When engineers are told to be clever instead of candid, the exhaust may one day reach the boardroom. Nick Leeson's day began before dawn in Singapore's sticky darkness, yet his mind never truly left London's Bishopsgate, where the marble lobby of Barings Bank held a hush that felt older than empire. Founded in 1762, Barings financed wars against Napoleon, underwrote the Louisiana Purchase, and hung oil paintings of partners with names like Baring, Bingham, Mildmay. By the mid-1990s, however, prestige alone could not compete with the profits promised by derivatives, and Leeson, a grammar school boy from Watford, seemed born to bridge the gap between snuffbox tradition and the new calculus of futures. Officially, he ran Barings' trading desk on the Singapore International Monetary Exchange, buying and selling Nikkei index contracts for clients in Tokyo, Zurich, and New York. Unofficially, he also served as his own back-office supervisor, reconciling trades he himself executed. In London, this dual role was called front and back, a conflict so blatant it should have been impossible. Yet headquarters, eager to expand in Asia, waved through the arrangement. When auditors inquired, managers praised Leeson's exceptional energy. They did not ask how that energy manifested on screen. It manifested in a single 5-digit number, 88888. Inside Baring's computer system, account 88888 was labeled error, a bin for small typos and misbooked tickets meant to be cleared within days. But Leeson discovered its blind spot. Trades parked there bypassed daily profit and loss reports. One February afternoon in 1992, he hit a modest loss, pound 20,000, hoping to erase it with the next morning's rally. The rally never came. Rather than confess, he doubled the position. By week's end, account 88888 was negative £400,000, a figure he rationalized as recoverable. He adjusted spreadsheets sent to London, showing only the winners. The Nikkei, however, slid through spring rain and summer typhoons. Each dip demanded larger bets to claw back the sinking balance. Leeson wrote options structured like dominoes. As long as Japan's market stayed inside a narrow corridor, premiums collected would outstrip losses. But earthquakes, literal and financial, ignore corridors. Every night he invented fresh counterparties, faxed forged confirmations, and reassured London in clipped transglobal calls, all squared, no exposure. Baring's back office, dazzled by statements reflecting steady profits, wired him more capital. The irony thickened. His fictitious gains financed his very real gamble. By 1994, the rogue position topped £500 million. Bishopsgate executives still believed Leeson was minting fees, the Eastern wizard, whose returns covered soft bonuses and harder egos. They invited him to holiday parties, where he sipped champagne beneath portraits of dead partners and felt, for a moment, almost legitimate. But jet lag and dread dogged him. In hotel rooms he ironed shirts at 3 a.m., eyes fixed on CNN tickers. If the Nikkei opened green, color flushed back into his cheeks. If red, he swallowed nausea and plotted fresh futures. January 17, 1995. The Great Hanshin earthquake leveled Kobe at 5:46 a.m., toppling elevated highways like toy tracks. Shockwaves reverberated through the Nikkei, which plunged at the opening bell. Leeson stared at screens blinking crimson, limit down then deeper. Margin calls erupted. He answered phones with lies layered upon lies. In London, a risk manager noticed odd funding requests and asked for a breakdown. Leeson emailed spreadsheets doctored in haste, decimal points nudged like musical notes. But numbers bulge until they burst. Less than a month after Kobe, account 88888 carried a loss of £827 million, double Baring's available capital. Leeson proposed one last bet, a long gun straddle that could, in theory, revive the corpse if the Nikkei rebounded sharply. He wired instructions to Osaka, mortgaging hope itself. The index twitched upward for an hour, then sagged, exhausted, into fresh lows. At midnight, Leeson typed a brief note to his boss, "Sorry," and boarded a flight to Kuala Lumpur, passport damp in his palm. In Bishopsgate, the alarm rang early Monday. Statements from Singapore failed to arrive. Phones rang unanswered. A junior accountant finally accessed the 88,888 ledger. Gaps widened into chasms, columns lurched into black. The figure, pound 1.3 billion in losses, materialized like a train in fog, then roared. By evening, the Bank of England had convened emergency talks, but Heritage offers no collateral against a hole that size. On Sunday, February 26, 1995, Baring's Brothers and Company collapsed. Sold for the ceremonial sum of £1 to ING of the Netherlands. 233 years of pedigree folded in a single weekend. Leeson was arrested in Frankfurt, extradited to Singapore, and sentenced to 6.5 years in Changi prison. Cameras captured him in manacles, head bowed, irony complete. The global trader now confined to a cell smaller than his old office lavatory. In memoirs written on yellow pads, he confessed the seductive logic of escalation. Lose a little, gamble a little more. Lose a lot, gamble everything. Risk managers quote those lines in seminars, half cautionary tale, half dark poetry. The building on Bishopsgate still stands, its marble lobby leased to a different institution. Tourists pass unaware that beneath the polished floor once coiled a phantom position large enough to sink a Queen's Bank. In a nearby cafe, a newer generation of analysts tracks algorithms that trade in microseconds yet remain governed by the same human pulse. Fear, pride, the longing to reverse a single bad bet by rolling dice again. The rogue trader saga lingers, like distant tremors from Kobe, reminding finance that transparency postponed is catastrophe compounded. And whenever a risk dashboard flashes an unexplained variance, veteran auditors feel a chill and recall the fatal symmetry of 5/8, proof that even the oldest pillars can crumble if one man hides the truth long enough to make hope look like strategy. The Netherlands does dawn quietly. Canals ripple like brushed silk, bicycles glide without chains creaking, and in the northern suburb of Zaandam a low-slung headquarters shaped like 3 stacked shipping containers wakes under a pearly sky. The facade reads Royal Ahold in modest lettering, but inside the company's ambitions stretch well beyond dikes and tulips. By 2000 the Dutch grocer owned chains from Massachusetts to Malaysia, reporting revenue that rose faster than yeast in warm dough. Analysts spoke of global dominance. Dutch newspapers preferred nationale trots, national pride. At the center stood Cees van der Hoven, a former auditor with an athlete's stride and a showman's wit. He liked to tell journalists that grocery retailing was a penny's business, then flash quarterly numbers that looked minted in guilders of old. Margins hovered magically above 4%. Small to a software firm, colossal to supermarkets accustomed to scraping for one. Van der Hoven credited synergy, buying bananas in Boston and Brussels with a single contract, cross-pollinating loyalty card data, and most heralded of all, a program called Accelerated Growth. In PowerPoints it appeared as an arrow shooting through pastel circles labeled volume, cost, trust. Few attendees noticed the footnote on slide 38, joint venture consolidation policy subject to judgment. Ahold had quietly shifted from proportional consolidation, booking its exact share of a partnership sales, to full consolidation, sweeping 100% onto its own ledger even when it owned only half. The maneuver obeyed a thin legal reed. If management exerted joint control, they argued, the entire cart counted. Accountants at Deloitte raised eyebrows. Ahold's internal team produced legal opinions from boutique firms in Luxembourg. The eyebrows lowered, not quite convinced but sufficiently appeased. The boldest alchemy unfolded across the Atlantic at U.S. Food Service, a Maryland-based wholesaler Ahold bought in 2000. Food Service delivered frozen fries and salad dressings to nearly every American hotel chain, making its books vast and granular. Deep within those books a practice called vendor allowance recognition blossomed. Suppliers routinely paid rebates, 2 cents per burger patty, a nickel for every gallon of mayonnaise, to secure shelf space. Normally such rebates flowed at year-end, after true volumes were known. Food service managers, under pressure from Zaandam, began booking the rebates as soon as contracts were signed, sometimes even before ink dried. When auditors asked for confirmation letters, suppliers obliged, but only after receiving draft language from food service itself. In some cases, signatures were faxed by clerks unaware of amounts written above their names. Back in Zaandam, spreadsheets aggregated these anticipatory rebates, converting nickels into hundreds of millions. Van der Hoven presented the totals as proof that Ahold's global buying power squeezed costs as no rival could. The share price responded, rising from €15 to €35 in 24 months. Pension funds in Eindhoven rebalanced toward Ahold. Amsterdam taxi drivers bought odd lots for their children's futures. CEO pay packages swelled, tied to stock performance. Bonuses trickled down to category managers who discovered that questioning accruals could delay their own. Yet doubts brewed. A junior accountant noticed that rebates for 2003 were partially recorded in 2002, an impossible overlap. She emailed her supervisor, who replied that volume thresholds are practically guaranteed. The phrase felt rubbery. She printed the ledger, highlighting the overlap in neon pink, and slipped it into a drawer labeled strange. Months later, when Deloitte's review loomed, that drawer would open. Parallel tremors came from Scandinavia, where Ahold's joint venture with ICA, a Swedish chain, posted earnings leaps unexplained by meat counter traffic. ICA's local auditors insisted only half the profits belonged to Ahold. Zaandam overrode them, citing strategic influence. Swedish regulators filed a protest. Ahold's legal counsel waved indemnities like semaphore flags. It worked for a while. The fracture finally surfaced on February 24, 2003. Deloitte, preparing to sign the annual report, requested routine supplier confirmations from U.S. Food Service. 2 major vendors, Conagra and Tyson, responded that the figures were materially overstated. Deloitte convened an emergency video call with Zaandam. The time difference placed van der Hoeven in his office at dawn, collar unbuttoned, tulip fields outside still dark. He promised quick clarification and rang Maryland, where a finance director confessed the scheme in a single exhale. "We booked allowances early, sir, about $500 million early." A silent half-minute followed, broken only by fluorescent hum. Van der Hoeven ended the call, summoned his CFO, and walked briskly to a conference room nicknamed the Windmill. There, Deloitte partners sat stone-faced. The auditors announced they would withhold their opinion. Trading of Ahold shares on Euronext halted before opening bell, trapping thousands of retail investors in uncertainty so thick it felt liquid. Press releases unspooled throughout the day. First a profit warning, earnings overstated by at least 500 million euros, then a resignation cascade. CFO, head of U.S. operations, finally Van der Hoeven himself. Cameras outside Zaandam captured employees clutching paper cups, staring as if the glass headquarters had turned to ice. By nightfall, newspapers dubbed the scandal Europe's Enron, though cows still grazed peacefully beyond the dikes, oblivious to corporate collapse. Investigations swarmed. The Dutch Financial Markets Authority teamed with the US SEC. Prosecutors in Washington subpoenaed pallet records, tracing every crate of ketchup that never truly subsidized a rebate. Emails revealed phrases like, "push as much into Q4 as feasible," and "our friends at Supplier X will sign whatever we need, let's draft." Deloitte, stung, issued mea culpas and overhauled its European training on revenue recognition. Ahold restated earnings by 970 million euros, wiping out nearly all profit reported since 1999. Class action lawsuits in America settled for $1.1 billion, then a record for a European issuer. Van der Hoeven faced trial in The Hague, where prosecutors displayed side-by-side income statements highlighting the mirage. Judges, unimpressed by defenses of complex accounting judgment, handed him a conditional prison sentence and hefty fines. Shareholders recovered fragments. Some Dutch retirees joked their pension now bought only half a herring. Yet the brand survived. Rebranded as Ahold Delhaize after a merger, the company today sells organic almond milk and gluten-free stroopwafels to shoppers who rarely recall the winter morning when rebates turned radioactive. In the lobby, a minimalist timeline omits 2003 entirely. Elevators glide past the ghost year in silence. Still, on certain evenings when rain taps the canals and neon supermarket signs glow across wet pavement, old analysts remember Zaandam's vanished margins. They recall how pennies businesses can conjure fortunes by shifting decimals, and how a rebate promised tomorrow can seduce an empire into counting cash it will never touch. The shelves now restocked with real goods whisper a caution. Inventory is tangible, but trust, once stretched to fit quarterly targets, tears in ways no shrink wrap can repair. The two-lane highway that curls through pine forests into Clinton, Mississippi, does not announce empire. Yet at the turn of the millennium, a tan glass building beside a Baptist college pulsed with ambition large enough to span continents. The sign outside read WorldCom, though locals still called it LDDS, the discount long-distance service born in a strip mall. Inside, carpeted corridors smelled of fresh coffee and ozone from overworked copiers. Posters quoted the company's founder, a rangy former milkman named Bernard Ebbers. "Think big, think fast, think ahead." Ebbers, Bernie to friends, cut an unlikely figure for a telecom baron. He favored cowboy boots, referred to employees as family, and opened shareholder meetings with prayer. But his growth plan was a street fighter's. Buy rivals before they could blink, pile their customers onto WorldCom's network, and promise Wall Street savings that would magic expenses into profits. Each acquisition announcement sent the stock climbing. Ebbers, paid largely in shares, saw his personal wealth crest into the billions. Analysts in New York joked that WorldCom was the only company that could double by dinner time if Bernie felt hungry enough. Beneath the folksy veneer, pressure brewed. Every quarter, Chief Financial Officer Scott Sullivan strode into the executive floor carrying a slim dossier of numbers. Those numbers had to dazzle. WorldCom's valuation depended on beating estimates few dared to doubt. In 1999, as new internet firms swallowed bandwidth, actual usage began lagging the extravagant projections baked into earnings targets. Sullivan searched for slack he could tighten. Line cost accounts, fees WorldCom paid to lease capacity from other carriers, caught his eye. What if some of those costs, he mused, were actually investments in network expansion? The shift seemed minor, almost philosophical. Move expenses from the income statement to the balance sheet, book them as assets, and profits would bloom instantly without a single extra call placed. An accountant in a windowless office drafted the first reclassification entry. $771 million moved out of expenses into capital expenditures. The keystrokes made no sound outside the finance wing, yet when the quarter closed, WorldCom reported record earnings. Reporters hailed the Mississippi Miracle. Sullivan sent a brief email to his team. Good job, more to come. The next quarter the line cost transfer doubled. A junior analyst hesitated, pointing out that assets normally came with physical form. Fiber laid, switches installed. Her supervisor replied that forthcoming acquisitions would validate the numbers. She lowered her gaze and booked the entry. In the summer of 2000, the dot-com bubble hissed and sagged. Telecom stocks wobbled, but WorldCom's earnings remained eerily steady, upheld by ever larger cost reclassifications, now billions each quarter. Share price held just long enough for Ebers to borrow heavily against his shares to fund personal ventures. Cattle ranches, soybean fields, even a minor league hockey team. When the stock finally dipped, margin calls arrived. The board, reluctant to wound its visionary, arranged company loans so Ebers could cover his debts without selling. The gesture bonded his fate to theirs. If share price fell further, both would drown. Far below the executive deck, an internal audit team led by Cynthia Cooper labored under fluorescent lights. Cooper, soft-spoken yet tenacious, noticed unusual late-night entries in the general ledger. Massive debits and credits posted just before books closed, references to obscure accounts called prepaid capacity. She asked for invoices, none arrived. Requests to the controller's office went unanswered. One evening, using a flashlight to avoid alerting security cameras, Cooper and a colleague slipped into an empty cubicle and printed supporting schedules they were officially denied. The pages confirmed her suspicion. Billions were parked in asset accounts with no underlying equipment. Cooper alerted the audit committee. Meetings followed in hushed conference rooms, attendees speaking as if walls had ears. Sullivan defended the reclassifications, citing industry practice. One outside director asked a simple question. If these assets are real, where are they? The silence that followed felt colder than the air conditioning. A special board meeting was scheduled for June 20, 2002. On the eve of that meeting, Sullivan telephoned Cooper, voice low, "Don't talk to the board tomorrow. We can fix this internally." She refused. In the boardroom, under the fluorescent glare, Cooper laid out the numbers. $3.8 billion improperly capitalized over 5 quarters, enough to erase all reported profit. Ebers sat rigid, boots planted like stakes. Sullivan, cheeks drained of color, murmured legal jargon about interpretation. The directors voted to dismiss him on the spot. Ebers resigned days later, citing health. WorldCom issued a terse press release admitting accounting irregularities, but the market sensed the abyss. Shares worth $64 2 years earlier slid below a dime. Pension funds, mutual funds, and small investors across America saw retirement dreams ghost into smoke. Federal agents arrived in Clinton while humidity still clung to magnolia leaves. They sealed file cabinets, cloned hard drives, and escorted Sullivan out through a side door. Ebers surrendered soon after, his once confident stride replaced by a slow shuffle. In court, prosecutors projected slides showing the rising staircase of false profits, each step labeled with the quarter's line cost adjustment. Jurors listened to recordings of earnings calls where Ebers spoke of remarkable discipline. Unaware discipline meant redefining debt as destiny. Sullivan received a 5-year sentence. Ebers drew 25, though ill health later shortened his stay. The tan glass building remains, now occupied by a healthcare insurer. Visitors find no plaques, only faint outlines where WorldCom's letters once gleamed. At twilight, when cicadas pulse in the pines, locals remember how an empire grew in their backyard, built not on copper lines but on numbers rerouted through clever keystrokes. They recall how trust traveled down those lines faster than any data packet, and how, once severed, it left silence more deafening than the busiest switchboard. The lesson rests in the Mississippi dusk. Profit can be borrowed from tomorrow only until tomorrow arrives. And when it does, even the warmest southern charm cannot soften the blunt truth that assets imagined in spreadsheets are, in the end, ghosts that vanish at first light. The Granite Tower at 420 Montgomery Street rises like a careful promise above San Francisco's financial district. Polished brass doors, red marble floors, an American flag draped beside a bronze stagecoach. Every detail whispers reliability. For generations, Wells Fargo and Company traded on that imagery. The bank that once hauled gold across Badlands still carried paychecks safely from one screen tap to another. Customers rarely imagined that inside the Art Deco corridors, a different kind of cargo had begun moving. Unwanted checking accounts, ghost credit cards, and fees extracted penny by penny from people who never asked for either. It started as a numbers game. In 2000, retail chief Carrie Tolstedt rolled out a mantra called "Going for GR8." 8 products per household, management said, would deepen loyalty and cement profitability. Branch managers hung colorful thermometers on breakroom walls, filling them with marker ink as staff fulfilled customer needs. Regional presidents received Friday emails ranking districts by average products sold. The bottom quartile faced conference call scoldings swift as stagecoach whips. Bonuses, promotions, even the right to keep one's job, hinged on hitting targets that crept upward each quarter like a waterline during flood season. Tellers adapted. Some mastered genuine cross-selling, persuading small business owners to open merchant accounts alongside savings. Others, pinched by quotas that no amount of courtesy could satisfy, discovered darker shortcuts. A checking account required only a name, an address, and a social security number. All 3 were already on file. To satisfy the system, an employee could click New, duplicate the customer profile, and where the form asked for signature verification, check a box labeled similar signature on file. If a credit card application popped a fraud alert, the same employee might enter a colleague's branch code, spreading risk across the district. The software issued provisional approvals automatically. Plastic cards arrived days later, tucked between grocery flyers and cable bills customers assumed were junk mail. By 2011, the practice had a trade floor nickname, sandbagging, but internally it hid behind euphemisms like gaming and bundling. Compliance officers noticed a surge in low balance accounts closed within weeks of opening. PowerPoint decks flagged the anomaly, yet every quarter the retail division paraded a metric called solutions per customer, climbing gracefully toward that talismanic 8. Wall Street analysts applauded industry-leading cross-sell. Executive bonuses ballooned. At shareholder meetings, CEO John Stumpf stood beneath an image of a red stagecoach kicking dust and praised our culture of accountability. Alarm bells clanged mostly in private. Employees who refused to cheat found themselves scheduling 7 a.m. coaching sessions, where supervisors recited scripts. How will you achieve 6 solutions today? A Los Angeles banker, Elena Quiroz, watched a colleague enter a stranger's email to suppress digital alerts, then print a debit card PIN mailer and shred it before the customer arrived. Quiroz reported the behavior to the ethics hotline. Soon after, her sales goals doubled. She eventually resigned, sending a farewell email that began, "I choose integrity." HR labeled her eligible for rehire, though no invitation followed. The first public crack appeared in 2013, when the Los Angeles City Attorney's Office opened an investigation based on 25 customer complaints, hardly a deluge for a bank with 70 million accounts. But Deputy City Attorney Tamar Pizer dug deeper, subpoenaing internal memos about branch motivation days, where managers urged staff to open accounts for each other to pad numbers. "We are all customers, right?" one memo read. Pizer found spreadsheets listing thousands of debit cards delivered to a single P.O. box. She shared her findings with the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, then barely 3 years old yet armed with civil penalty powers. Inside Wells Fargo, meetings multiplied. Executives framed misconduct as isolated, bad apples in a few branches. To prove contrition, they fired 1,800 low-level employees over 3 years, often in short, silent HR interviews ending with a cardboard box. Yet the quotas remained, and with them the incentive to cheat. One district manager, ignoring memos about ethics, told subordinates, "No excuses, solutions, solutions, solutions." September 8, 2016 arrived like dry lightning. The CFPB, OCC, and Los Angeles prosecutors released a joint settlement. Wells Fargo would pay $185 million for opening 1.5 million unauthorized deposit accounts and 565,000 credit cards. The figures astonished the public, but insiders knew the real tally was likely higher. The regulators had sampled only a 5-year window. The bank neither admitted nor denied wrongdoing yet issued full-page newspaper ads touting renewed commitment to trust. The fallout, however, refused to stay on script. Senate hearings summoned John Stumpf. Under the glare of camera lights, Senator Elizabeth Warren asked whether he had returned $1 of his $200 million compensation. Stumpf's voice faltered. He had not. Within weeks he resigned, forfeiting $41 million in stock but keeping much more. Tolstedt departed earlier, praised in a press release for unparalleled leadership, though the board later clawed back $67 million of her pay. Branch employees, some fired for refusing to cheat, watched the spectacle from living room couches, feeling vindication tinged with bitterness. Reforms followed. The board abolished product quotas, replacing them with customer experience metrics. Regulators levied an unprecedented asset cap, freezing Wells Fargo's growth until governance improved. In Phoenix, call center headsets now play recorded disclaimers. Did you request this product? Press 1 to confirm. Yet trust, once breached, recovers slower than share price. Customers still find fragments of bygone accounts on credit reports, strange echoes of an era when a banker 3 states away clicked a box that said similar signature on file. Today the granite tower remains, flag unfurled, brass polished. A new CEO recites fresh slogans about culture change. But on certain mornings, when fog drifts over Coit Tower and the city feels porous to secrets, passers-by glance up at 420 Montgomery and imagine phantom debit cards tumbling through the mail, each embossed with a name spelled perfectly yet never signed. The scandal's lesson lingers like a rubber stamp hitting paper. When ambition turns numeric targets into moral ceilings, signatures can lose meaning, and a venerable brand can watch its stagecoach veer into dust of its own making. The residents of Silverton, Ohio, understood generosity as a civic duty, so when the newly formed Silverton Future Endowment began hosting monthly luncheons at the town library, attendance was all but guaranteed. A genial, mustached accountant named Gregory Hale greeted donors at the door, pressing warm palms, handing out glossy brochures emblazoned with photos of bright-eyed children and neat pie charts that glowed green with promise. He spoke softly about scholarships for local graduates, grants for struggling family farms, even seed money for the public hospital's neonatal wing. In a town that prided itself on neighborliness, Hale's appeal felt almost patriotic. Checks flew across polished oak tables like confetti. Hale kept meticulous records, columns of dates, names, amounts, and let donors leaf through them whenever they wished. Yet the balance sheet he displayed was only a stage prop. The real ledger lived on an encrypted laptop in his study, where colorful graphs hid a void. Each incoming donation, instead of joining a proper investment portfolio, was wired to an offshore money market account under a shell corporation with no employees and a single listed officer, Gregory Hale. For nearly 4 years the charade glided forward on polished shoes. Twice annually, Hale mailed impact statements to contributors, printed on heavyweight cream paper, reporting steady, respectable growth. He issued modest scholarship checks, never more than $2,000 or $3,000, to a handful of students, keeping the illusion tactile. Whenever anyone asked about touring the endowment's regional office in Columbus, he smiled and lamented tight construction schedules or renovations. No one pressed. After all, the trust's purpose was noble, and Hale's own children attended local schools. The arrangement felt safe, almost cozy. But fraud, like rot beneath wallpaper, seldom stays hidden forever. A mild winter turned into a soaked spring, and Silverton's farmers faced catastrophic crop blight. The town council drafted an emergency aid package and contacted the endowment for matching funds. Hale, cornered, promised $250,000 within 60 days. The sum frightened him, but he found reassurance in his usual strategy: postpone, deflect, and raise fresh cash. He scheduled a gala, ordered garlands, and convinced himself a flood of new pledges would keep the wheels turning. Among the gala's volunteers was Amelia Price, a former auditing assistant who had moved home after a layoff in Chicago. She admired Hale's poise yet felt uneasy about the endowment's famously opaque investment strategy. 3 late nights into designing seating charts, she decided to verify a rumor that the nonprofit's tax returns were public record. From her childhood bedroom, She navigated the IRS database and found Form 990s filed under Silverton Future Endowment. They revealed less than 1/10 the assets Hale had bragged about. Curious turned to anxious. She cross-checked the grants list and uncovered only 3 scholarships in 4 years. The next morning, Price requested donor rolls for accurate place cards. Hale obliged, unaware of her growing suspicion. She created a simple spreadsheet: donations in, scholarships out. The gap was a canyon. A polite phone call to the Ohio Attorney General's Charitable Enforcement Section confirmed that nonprofits of their size should undergo annual independent audits. No audit reports existed. The canyon widened. Price's approach to Hale was calm. She asked over coffee if the endowment might post its audit online to reassure large donors. Hale laughed it off, referring to technical delays at the accounting firm. His eyes darted, lips thinned. That night he emailed her a PDF stamped draft, confidential, peppered with errors a first-week accounting intern could spot. The document misspelled the endowment's name twice. Price forwarded the file to her friend Marcus Lee, who worked at a mid-tier forensic accounting outfit in Cincinnati. Lee, intrigued, ran a quick asset search. The endowment held no brokerage accounts under its EIN. He flagged the matter up his chain of command. 2 days later, a senior investigator phoned Price, requesting everything: emails, donor lists, the fake audit. She complied. The firm discreetly reached out to the Attorney General's office, and within a week a civil investigative demand landed on Hale's desk. He froze, heartbeat thrumming, then did what many fraudsters do at the first knock of authority. He improvised. He wired $50,000 back from the offshore account to cover a handful of overdue college invoices, hoping partial restitution might soften regulators. It did not. Subpoenas followed, targeting bank records, IP logs, flight manifests. Hale's polite facade unraveled in fluorescent interview rooms as investigators traced $3.7 million in donations through shell companies to a Bahamian condominium complex and a half-finished yacht brokerage. Silverton watched events unfold with a collective gasp. Local news vans parked outside the library where gala centerpieces still wilted. On a drizzly Tuesday, Hale was arrested leaving a fitness club, gym bag slung over one shoulder, face pale as printer paper. The indictment listed wire fraud, money laundering, and filing false charitable statements. During arraignment he whispered, "Not guilty," but his voice was smaller than anyone remembered. Restitution hearings stretched for months. Investigators clawed back assets. A foreclosure on the seaside condo, liquidation of the yacht slip, auction of rare edition baseball cards Hale had purchased as investments. Ultimately, 82 cents on the donated dollar returned to Silverton. The neonatal wing broke ground after all, slightly scaled down but real. Scholarships resumed under a new board chaired by Amelia Price, who insisted every meeting be live-streamed and every tax return stapled to the library bulletin board. Town gossip still circles around Gregory Hale: how a mild-mannered accountant weaponized trust, how politely folded napkins could mask a ledger of lies. Some evenings, older donors linger outside the finished neonatal wing, peering through glass at incubators humming softly in pink light. They whisper that deception thrived because its villains spoke their own language of community, generosity, and gentle optimism. The moral lodges in quiet hearts. Fraud often enters not as a stranger snarling at the gate, but as a neighbor bearing gifts, offering precisely what a town most yearns to believe. Rain traced thin silver lines down the windows of Lytton Tower, a glass needle that pierced the gray Seattle sky. On the 21st floor, conference lights glowed over a sleek sign reading QuantaShield Cyber Defense. Employees, many barely out of college, spoke reverently of the firm's founder, Colin Drake, who claimed his proprietary Phantom Patch engine could detect and fix new malware strains before antivirus labs even named them. Clients loved the pitch. A subscription that delivered invisible security updates every night at 2 o'clock, no restarts, no delays. For businesses terrified of ransomware headlines, it sounded like a seatbelt that tightened before the crash. Drake fit the part. Tall, clean-shaven, he wore navy Henleys instead of suits and quoted Marcus Aurelius during product demos. He insisted on dimmed lights when unveiling dashboards, green bars pulsed, red bars vanished, and the words "threats neutralized" glimmered in faint neon. Corporations signed multi-year contracts. A regional bank paid $3 million up front. A hospital network, still recovering from a breach, wired $7 million without negotiating. Revenue doubled every quarter. Tech blogs crowned Drake Seattle's silent guardian. Yet inside the server cage, the Phantom Patch was less guardian than ghost. The nightly update job pushed a 312-byte script that merely pinged clients' machines, wrote update successful to a log and deleted itself. No malware signatures, no heuristic models, only smoke. Drake argued to engineers that secret machine learning magic lived in the cloud, beyond even their clearance, and most accepted the myth. He granted access sparingly, compartmentalizing teams so no one saw the whole architecture. Suspicion surfaced from an unexpected source. Maya Patel, a junior systems analyst at Sunrise Logistics, one of QuantaShield's earliest customers. Tasked with documenting third-party tools for an upcoming audit, she noticed that Phantom Patch consumed negligible bandwidth, kilobytes, not the expected megabytes. Curious, she captured the overnight traffic and discovered nothing but a brief, encrypted handshake. She forwarded her packet capture to Sunrise's CTO, Peter Morales, adding a single line, "Is this it?" Morales, a veteran who once managed firewalls at the Pentagon, felt a twist of unease. He requested a detailed technical paper from QuantaShield. Drake replied within an hour, attaching a glossy PDF heavy on buzzwords, quantum-inspired entropy analysis, zero-time delta remediation, and light on specific algorithms. Morales pressed for a SOC2 audit report. Drake promised it next quarter, citing backlog at the accounting firm. The answer felt rehearsed. Morales quietly contacted Robert Chin, a former colleague now working at the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, CISA. Chin proposed a simple test. Plant a benign but unmistakable fake virus on an isolated Sunrise workstation, then watch whether Phantom Patch removed it. The lure was set on a rainy Thursday. The nightly window passed. The file remained untouched. Sunrise terminated its contract under a confidentiality clause but shared the experiment with CISA through a back channel. Investigators moved deliberately. CISA sent an undercover analyst, posing as a procurement officer for a federal research lab, to tour QuantaShield's facility. Drake showcased rows of blinking servers, but the analyst noticed that most were powered off, their status LEDs dark. Still, nothing proved fraud. Some firms rented excess capacity for show. CISA submitted a sealed request to QuantaShield for technical evidence of threat signature generation. Drake responded with anonymized code snippets, plausible but impossible to compile without missing modules. Parallel pressure arrived from venture capitalists preparing a Series C round. Their due diligence firm, Calder & Rowe, hired a reverse engineering specialist named Eliza Kohler to deconstruct the Phantom Patch installer. Kohler discovered that the binary contained hard-coded SSH keys pointing to a single AWS instance running a vanilla Apache server. No AI clusters, no GPU nodes, only a static landing page. She filed an urgent report. Overnight, the lead investor froze all incoming capital. Drake sensed walls closing. He convened a 7 a.m. all-hands meeting, blamed bad faith actors, and promised a transparency portal within 48 hours. Employees applauded, but several exchanged wary glances. That afternoon, Drake entered the server cage alone, carrying a small toolbox. A security camera captured him pulling drives from the primary storage array and sliding them into a backpack. He exited 27 minutes later, eyes darting like a man scanning for storm clouds. The backpack never left the building. QuantaShield's compliance officer, Sarah Levy, reviewing live camera feeds, alerted police and locked the elevators. Officers arrived to find Drake in a stairwell, clutching the drives. He offered a strained smile, claimed he was migrating hardware. The explanation dissolved when detectives opened the backpack. 12 encrypted SSDs, 5 passports, 1 American, 1 Irish, 3 Caribbean, plus $60,000 in crisp hundreds. News of the arrest rippled through Puget Sound before lunchtime. The U.S. Attorney's Office unsealed a complaint detailing wire fraud, money laundering, and obstruction. Federal agents imaged every remaining server, discovering the 312-byte script and a ledger showing $128 million in client payments routed through shell companies in Liechtenstein and Panama. No evidence of a real threat analysis engine surfaced. Only PowerPoint decks and a handful of AI buzzword bingo cards. In court, Drake's confident veneer cracked. Prosecutors played a video of his keynote at a cybersecurity summit. "We neutralize danger before others can name it." Jurors watched silently, eyes hard. Testimony from Maya Patel and Peter Morales outlined the sham. Sarah Levy described the backpack incident, voice steady but soft, as though still baffled by the speed of betrayal. After a 3-week trial, the jury returned guilty verdicts on all counts. Sentencing guidelines pointed to 22 years. The judge imposed 19, citing Drake's calculated theft of trust in an already anxious digital era. QuantaShield collapsed overnight. Clients scrambled for replacement security, some discovering dormant malware that had lingered undetected for months. Sunrise Logistics, spared by timely suspicion, published a memo urging vigilance. Ask for code, not just conviction. Meanwhile, employees found new jobs, carrying a fresh skepticism into every onboarding call. On certain winter evenings, rain still paints silver streaks across Lytton Tower's darkened windows. Cleaning crews passed the vacant 21st floor, lights off, desks bare, server cage empty. They say the silence feels heavier there, as if echoing words once spoken too smoothly. Outside, Seattle traffic hums, and somewhere a junior analyst monitors packet flows, wondering which green bar can be trusted and which hides a hollow promise. Miles of rolling pasture separated the farming town of Blue Oak, Missouri from the nearest interstate, and that isolation bred a quiet longing for anything that felt like progress. When Horizon AgTech arrived with banners promising a soil restoration miracle, the townspeople hardly needed convincing. Their fields, exhausted by decades of corn and soybean rotations, sat crusted and pale. Horizon's founder, Dr. Victor Bennett, arrived in a cream pickup, khaki spotless, smile gentle. He introduced a biologically engineered seed coating, Grow Revive, that he claimed fixed atmospheric nitrogen and detoxified glyphosate residues in a single season. The coating, he said, was subsidized by a federal soil innovation grant. Farmers owed only a modest pilot program fee of $50 per acre. Bennett spoke at the Blue Oak Grange Hall on a warm April night. Under strings of bare bulbs, he unrolled glossy maps showing projected yield curves, blue lines soaring above the red of status quo. He sprinkled the talk with words like regenerative cascade and microbial symbiosis, but kept the message simple. Pay the fee, plant like normal, watch your yields climb 40%. He ended with a pledge. If Grow Revive failed to outperform by at least 20%, Horizon would refund every dollar. By month's end, 73 farmers, virtually the entire township, signed up. Bennett's field team drove door to door with iPads, capturing electronic signatures and routing funds to Horizon's escrow wallet. The coating arrived in silver 5-gallon buckets, each stamped with a QR code and a warning: refrigerate below 45 degrees Fahrenheit. Farmers, eager to comply, stacked buckets in walk-in coolers beside seed corn and homemade sausage links. Spring planting passed in a blur of diesel and red dust. Bennett sent weekly newsletters, satellite images of slowly greening plots, testimonials from test farms in Iowa, smiling agronomists giving thumbs up. Blue Oak residents gathered at the diner each Friday to compare sprout heights, and early signs seemed promising: stalks a shade deeper, leaves broader. Hope became a tangible thing, like the scent of cut alfalfa before rain. Then summer arrived, and with it a sudden yellowing. First came the Jackson acreage on County Road 9, then the Delgado bottoms near the river. Leaves blanched, tassels drooped. Bennett attributed the stress to an unusual heat spike and urged patience. He offered discounted foliar supplements, phase 2 of the Grow Revive protocol, billed as a nutritional booster. Another $15 per acre slipped from checking accounts. Among the skeptics was Lila Hart, who ran the Blue Oak Cooperative Grain Elevator. She noticed that Bennett's newsletters never referenced actual bushel counts, only vigor indices and chlorophyll density deltas. When she scanned the QR code on an empty coating bucket, the link redirected to a generic landing page with no scientific documentation, just a photo of Bennett beside a field of improbably green wheat. Lila emailed Horizon's listed research director. The message bounced. Harvest exposed everything. Combines rolled through brittle stalks that shattered like chalk. Yields fell 25% below the 5-year average. Financial ruin loomed, and still Bennett's refund promise remained a line on a slide deck, untapped. Phone calls to Horizon's Denver headquarters diverted to voicemail. The website displayed a maintenance banner. Lila, powered by equal parts anger and caffeine, began digging. She reached the USDA's National Institute of Food and Agriculture and asked for details about Horizon's federal grant. An official replied, no such grant existed. She pulled Bennett's PhD dissertation from the University of Nebraska archives. It covered drought-resilient sorghum, not microbial seed coatings, and his committee chair listed him as withdrawn without completion. Horizon's corporate registration traced to a co-working space in Boulder. With winter closing in, foreclosure notices peppered mailboxes. Blue Oak's mayor drafted an emergency appeal to the state agriculture department, attaching Lila's findings. The Missouri Attorney General's Consumer Protection Division opened an inquiry and, within days, served Horizon's registered agent with a subpoena. But Bennett was nowhere to be found. The break came from an unexpected direction. An alert clerk at a Wichita equipment dealership recognized Bennett's pickup. Same cream color, same custom grille, from a departmental bulletin. Bennett had traded it for a used Class A motorhome, paying the difference in cash. Security footage captured him loading buckets, unlabeled this time, into the RV's side storage. The tag pinged a toll camera heading south on I-35. Federal marshals intercepted the motorhome at a roadside RV park outside Austin, Texas. Bennett stepped out in flip-flops, holding a garden hose as plainclothes agents approached. Inside, investigators found suitcases stuffed with $440,000 in bundled bills, 3 fake IDs, and a laptop detailing a plan to market Grow Revive in Spain under a new brand, Suelo Sena. Analysis of the coating in the storage bay revealed it to be talc mixed with blue food dye and trace amounts of urea, chemically worthless. Back in Blue Oak, news of the arrest traveled faster than any crop report. Local stations aired helicopter shots of the RV, its awning flapping in Texas sun. The Attorney General filed charges: wire fraud, agricultural product misbranding, and money laundering. Prosecutors calculated farmer losses at $9.8 million. Bennett eventually accepted a plea deal: 12 years in federal prison and restitution of assets seized from offshore accounts in Belize and the Isle of Man. Months later, the first restitution checks, modest but real, arrived. Farmers used them to pay down seed loans and, in quieter moments, to replace cracked water troughs or splurge on a new calf for the 4-H club. Lila Hart, now hailed as the town's unlikely detective, was elected to the county agriculture board. She partnered with the state university to launch free soil testing clinics and invited researchers to speak. No glossy promises, just data. Blue Oak's fields did what Midwestern soil has always done. They healed slowly, season by season, under the patient watch of people who had learned the hard way that miracles yielding 40% gains often bloom only in PowerPoint. In the evenings, when combined headlights traced arcs across dark loam, farmers remembered Bennett's gentle smile and felt an ember of caution. Fraud had arrived not dressed as a hedge fund tycoon or distant bureaucrat, but as a man who spoke their language, shook their calloused hands, and promised salvation in a bucket the color of sky. The lesson lingered like the scent of winter stubble. Progress, if it comes, will likely wear humbler clothes. The startup scene along Dublin's Grand Canal buzzed with espresso machines and venture talk, and no firm hummed more confidently than Lennox Procurement Solutions. From an airy loft overlooking the water, its founder, Aidan Kearney, promised to unlock trapped working capital for Ireland's small manufacturers by paying their supplier invoices up front, then collecting from buyers later. It sounded practical, almost boring, yet investors saw sparkle: the island's first tech-enabled invoice factoring platform. Kearney, barely 30, wore dark wool coats that swung like capes. He had once played amateur theater, and the habit of holding a room never left him. During demo days he projected dashboards on a brick wall, thin green bars for invoices received, thicker blue bars for invoices paid, all marching upward in tidy cadence. Banks declined to finance the venture, wary of risk, so Kearney persuaded a circle of family offices to lend at 8%, secured by the invoices themselves. Each loan tranche bore a reassuring label, fully collateralized. For the first 6 months Lennox performed as promised. Small tool makers in Galway and Sligo faxed purchase orders to Kearney's team. Buyers, often British wholesalers, confirmed the debt via email. Funds flowed within 48 hours. Repayments landed on schedule, and investors received monthly interest transfers peppered with gifts of clinking pint glasses. The system felt frictionless, almost friendly. But growth demanded inventory Kearney could not find quickly enough. Real invoices arrived at a modest pace, whereas investor appetite ballooned. One damp November evening he opened a spreadsheet and keyed in a hypothetical. If Lennox simply created additional invoices, say €2 million worth, his yield curve would leap, and he could close the next funding round on better terms. He convinced himself it was temporary. He would retire the fakes once more genuine business appeared. After pouring a late whiskey, he fabricated a purchase order from a UK electronics chain, complete with VAT number copied from a public registry, and saved the PDF under Batch 22. The ruse was invisible. Verification emails went to an alias he controlled. Phone confirmations routed through VoIP numbers answered in a soft London accent he practiced during college. Investors, appeased by tidy paperwork, wired another €1.5 million. Kearney used part of it to buy an electric Jaguar, explaining the lease as brand signaling. Suspicion crept in on a Tuesday morning when Emma O'Neill, an associate at Dromore family office, called Lennox to discuss extending their credit line. While chatting, she casually asked for a tour of a supplier. She had an upcoming trip to Manchester and fancied seeing an invoice in action. Kearney, voice smooth, promised to arrange everything. After hanging up, he felt the sudden chill of reality. The supplier didn't exist. He drafted a series of delaying emails. The plant was undergoing renovations, COVID protocols limited visitors, the finance manager was out sick. O'Neill, polite yet persistent, suggested a simple video call instead. Kearney agreed, then spent a frantic weekend converting a friend's garage into a faux warehouse. He stacked cardboard boxes, printed a banner with the electronics chain's logo, and persuaded 2 actors from his old theater troupe to play operations staff. The video call lasted 8 minutes. O'Neill smiled, took notes, and said she'd circle back. She circled back to Google first. The logo on the banner differed subtly from the chain's current branding, updated earlier that year. A detail most would miss, but O'Neill's brother designed retail signage and had mentioned the change. Her curiosity sharpened. She requested copies of the original sales contracts, this time asking that they be emailed directly by the buyer's finance department. Hours passed. Kearney sent nothing. O'Neill escalated. Dromore hired a Dublin forensic accounting boutique, Hanrahan and Bale, to review Lennox's top 20 invoices. Within a week the firm found irregularities. Phone numbers that rang forever, VAT numbers registered to defunct firms, bank accounts opened only months earlier. They quietly contacted 2 other family offices. Those offices found the same rot. Together they approached Ireland's Corporate Enforcement Authority. Investigators moved silently. One evening, as Lennox staff clocked out, 2 plainclothes officers slipped into the loft with a warrant. They imaged servers, photographing each invoice folder. A junior engineer, still tapping at a keyboard, offered them coffee, unaware his employer's fate was sealing. By dawn the officers had traced €8.9 million in phantom invoices, roughly a third of Lennox's stated collateral. Kearney learned of the raid from a panicked text. He hastened to the office, only to find the entrance taped off. Cameras caught him pausing, hands buried in pockets, shoulders sinking like sails without wind. He turned, intending to flee, but 2 detectives greeted him by name. The arrest unfolded quietly beside the canal, morning joggers passing with headphones on, oblivious. News outlets labeled it the ghost invoice caper. Court filings revealed Kearney had diverted investor funds into cryptocurrency, art house film projects, and the Jaguar lease. He pleaded guilty to fraud and falsifying financial instruments, hoping for leniency. During sentencing, the judge stated that Kearney had exploited the optimism of those who believed in Irish enterprise, then imposed 7 years in Mountjoy prison and ordered asset restitution. Investors recovered roughly 60 cents on the euro after liquidations. The electric Jaguar, auctioned in cold drizzle, fetched a fraction of its sticker price. Dromore family office rewrote its due diligence checklist. Site visits would now be unannounced, logos photographed against the day's newspaper. Emma O'Neill, once soft-spoken, became the office's unofficial skeptic, her questions shorter, sharper. Grand Canal life rolled on. Startups still crowded the quays, cappuccinos still steamed, but posters in co-working lobbies now carried a new slogan: invoices don't talk, call the buyer. On evenings when streetlights flickered over the water, passers-by might recall the young founder in the swinging coat and wonder how many steps separate ambition from deceit. The answer, blue-white in reflection, seemed no wider than the canal itself. One crisp PDF, one phone number that rings too long, one question unasked. Morning mist drifted over the low stone walls of Bibury, a postcard village tucked into England's Cotswold Hills. Residents spoke in soft, measured tones, the way people do when sheep outnumber people and time feels patient. So it startled everyone when flyers appeared in shop windows announcing Glint Power green bonds, ethical, asset-backed investments bringing solar energy to rural Britain. The face of the offering was Oliver Trent, a boyish entrepreneur in tweed jackets and bright trainers who claimed roots in nearby Cirencester. Trent's pitch was disarmingly simple. Old dairy farms, he said, could lease and used paddocks for small solar arrays. Glint Power would handle planning, installation, and grid interconnection. Investors would finance the build through 5-year bonds yielding 7%. At a village hall meeting, he clicked through slides of sunlit panels glimmering beside contented cattle. Your money, he declared, stays local, lights local, pays local. The audience, mostly retirees nursing weak tea, liked the sound of a steady coupon more than the dream of planetary rescue. Within weeks, Trent collected £4.3 million from Gloucestershire postcodes alone, funneling checks into Glint Power's NatWest account. To reassure backers, he mailed quarterly fact sheets printed on recycled parchment. They listed 6 solar sites: Meadowgate, Brooklands, Holly Rise, all commissioned or awaiting final inverter delivery. The reports featured drone photos of tidy panel rows, canted toward an obliging sun. Yet 2 of those farms belonged to Malcolm and Edna Stubbs, who had no panels, no lease, and no awareness of Glint Power until Edna's bridge partner mentioned the handsome newsletter. When the couple drove to Brooklands Lane and saw only wet grass and grazing ewes, Edna felt a prickle behind her ribs. She rang Oliver Trent's office number. A cheerful voicemail promised a return call that never came. Edna then wrote to the local planning authority, inquiring about solar array permits. The officer replied the records showed none. Edna shared the letter during coffee morning at St. Mary's, and talk spread across limestone cottages faster than ivy. A parish councillor contacted Trading Standards, who in turn forwarded the concern to the Financial Conduct Authority's unauthorized business department. Trent, sensing headwind, drove his silver Audi to every parish he could reach, blaming bureaucratic lag and waving folders of engineer diagrams. His charm held, temporarily. But the FCA quietly subpoenaed Glint Power's bank statements and discovered funds moving from NatWest to a Latvian fintech platform, then on to a Monaco brokerage where Trent had purchased shares in luxury yacht builders. Less than 15% of investor money remained in Britain. The FCA's enforcement team, joined by rural crime officers unaccustomed to white-collar work, visited Meadowgate Farm at dawn. They found no solar equipment. Instead, they met Mrs. Rushton, who was bottle-feeding lambs and looked puzzled when shown an aerial image of panels supposedly in her east field. She shook her head, laughed once, and said, "Love, we still hang socks on the Aga rail to dry. Why would we need photovoltaics?" Investigators obtained a warrant for Glint Power's Cirencester office, 2 rooms above an estate agent. They walked in to find untouched biscuits, a dead fern, and a receptionist who confessed she was hired through a temp agency and had never met Trent in person. Laptop drives were missing and paper files lay neatly shredded into confetti. Trent, meanwhile, was already in Nice, booking a helicopter to San Remo. French border police, alerted by Interpol Red Notice, intercepted him at passport control. He surrendered without argument, muttering about market cynicism. In his carry-on they found a single hard drive, 2 notebooks filled with bondholder details, and a Cotswolds walking guide with handwritten hearts beside 3 villages, each a pocket of uncollected money he'd planned to visit after finishing Mediterranean business. Extradited to London, Trent faced charges of fraud by misrepresentation and money laundering. Court proceedings unfolded in Southwark Crown Court beneath harsh fluorescent light that flattened every expression. Prosecutors played village hall footage. Trent at a lectern, promising risk-free returns, children's drawings of solar suns taped to the wall behind him. Pensioners took the stand, voices wavering yet firm. One man, a former RAF radio operator, testified he had invested because Spitfires ran on faith and metal, and young Trent reminded me of both. Defense counsel argued glint power was simply early stage. Delays, not deceit, explained the missing panels. But an FCA analyst demonstrated that equipment invoices were photoshopped. Serial numbers belonged to a Czech scrapyard. The jury deliberated less than 3 hours, returning unanimous guilty verdicts. The judge, noting the intimate betrayal of community trust, sentenced Trent to 8 years and banned him from company directorships for 15. Asset recovery officers auctioned the Audi, a Côte d'Azur apartment, and the yacht shares. After fees, victims recovered about 62 pence on the pound. The parish council used a sliver of its restitution to install real solar panels on the primary school roof. Cheaper, smaller, but producing genuine electricity that powered classroom tablets and warmed lunchtime soup. Sunday walks through Bibury now pass a modest plaque beside the village hall door. Ask to see the panels. The reminder feels neither bitter nor triumphant, merely practical. Residents still dream of greener energy, but they insist on rubber boots in the field, planning office stamps, and the hum of inverters you can touch. And when morning mist curls over the Cotswold stone, it carries a quieter promise. Light is trustworthy enough on its own. It doesn't need a salesman's shine. The buzz began at Manhattan's spring wine auction, when bidders gasped at a single lot, 12 bottles of 1947 Chateau Lafleur, each glinting dark ruby under the showroom lamps. The consignor, a polite Indonesian-American collector named Rudy Hartono, stood at the back, hands clasped, offering a modest smile that seemed to apologize for his own good fortune. Lafleur 47 was legend, an elixir of post-war sunlight in a bottle, and experts estimated only a few dozen authentic examples still existed worldwide. Yet here were 12, their labels crisp, their fill levels perfect. When the hammer fell at $540,000, applause rippled like a slow uncorking. Hartono became an overnight star in the cloistered world of rare wine. He dined with sommeliers who quoted Balzac, gifted 6-liter Nebuchadnezzars to charity galas, and charmed Wall Street veterans who normally gauged risk in basis points, not berry notes. His Brooklyn townhouse hosted tastings where candles flickered against gilt-edged Riedel glasses as he poured Romani Conti from magnums no one had seen listed at Christie's or Sotheby's. Each time, he claimed provenance as casually as others mention a grocery receipt, purchased from a private seller in Provence, old family, terribly discreet. Among those captivated was Lawrence Feld, a Los Angeles hedge fund founder who considered himself a disciple of authenticity. He flew cross-country for Hartono's dinners, journaled tasting notes in looping fountain pen script, and gradually bought $2.8 million in bottles the collector offered quietly after dessert. Feld bragged that he could identify fraudulent wine by color alone. His confidence eased any sting of extravagance. Suspicion crept in on a humid July evening at the Hotel Bel Air, where Hartono hosted a comparative tasting of 1990s Bordeaux. One guest, Maureen Dow, a former chemical engineer turned wine consultant, watched as Hartono decanted a Jeroboam of Chateau Petrus 90 sporting a label so pristine it looked ironed. Telltale glue residue peeking from a corner pricked her curiosity. Authentic Petrus labels of that era used a dry gum adhesive, never shiny. During a lull, she snapped a discreet photo and sent it to a friend in Bordeaux who archived Chateau bottling quirks. The friend replied minutes later. The foil capsule's embossing style wasn't introduced until 1996. Dow said nothing publicly, but doubt nested like a sparrow behind her ribs. 2 weeks later she flew to Napa for business and carried a half-empty Petrus 90 bottle Hartono had gifted her. A lab in St. Helena performed isotope analysis. Carbon ratios revealed the alcohol derived partly from corn sugar, impossible for Merlot from Pomerle's clay. The wine was an imposter. Dow alerted the FBI's art crime team, whose remit includes high-value counterfeits. Agents quietly subpoenaed auction house transaction logs, mapping a pattern. Over 3 years Hartono had consigned nearly $30 million in purportedly rare Burgundies and Bordeaux, always in impeccable condition, often in larger formats seldom released by the estates themselves. Red flags waved like pennants over a parade. The Bureau recruited Bill Koch, an American billionaire and wine obsessive who years earlier had sued a dealer for fakes. Koch supplied photographs of legitimate labels and cork stamps, which analysts compared to Hartono's lots. Fonts misaligned by half a millimeter, accent marks leaned at odd angles, vintage years printed with ink formulas unavailable in the 1940s. Each anomaly alone felt trivial. Together they formed a lattice of deceit. Agents obtained a covert warrant to place a tracker on Hartono's delivery van. It led them not to some hidden chateau cache but to a suburban strip mall warehouse in Arcadia, California. Surveillance cameras captured pallets of empty antique-style bottles shipped from a Chinese glass factory, rolls of blank vellum, a hot foil stamper, and racks of modern California Cabernet awaiting rebirth as Bordeaux of the century. When agents finally raided the warehouse, they found Hartono in a painter's smock, dabbing tea over fresh labels to mimic decades of cellar dust. He greeted them with a melancholic nod, as though the game were over and he was glad of it. The haul filled 2 trucks, 12,000 counterfeit bottles, corks branded with Chateau insignias carved by laser, and a spreadsheet listing future releases, among them a mythical 1899 Domaine de la Romanie Conti, priced at $100,000 a bottle. The indictment charged wire fraud, mail fraud, and trafficking in counterfeit goods. Feld, furious and embarrassed, testified that Hartono had duped him with friendship as much as fraud. During cross-examination, the defense painted Hartono as a savant chasing the platonic ideal of taste, claiming buyers sought an experience, not provenance. The jury disagreed. Judge Denise Cote called the scheme alchemy for profit and sentenced Hartono to 10 years in federal prison, ordering restitution of $28.4 million and forfeiture of the Arcadia warehouse. Collectors worldwide scrambled to test sellers. Corks popped not for celebration but forensics. Auction houses tightened authentication, employing ultraviolet scanners and demanding chateau confirmation before listing pre-1982 vintages. In Brooklyn, the townhouse lights stayed dark, ivy crawling over front steps. Feld stored the counterfeit bottles in a glass cabinet labeled caveat emptor and found ironic comfort in their aesthetic. The liquid inside, he said, could serve as vinegar for salad dressing. Dow resumed consulting, now whispered about as the palate that toppled the king of counterfeit claret. New York's wine scene calmed, but every raised glass carried a flicker of doubt. Sommeliers invited patrons to examine cork etchings, to sniff for inconsistencies, to taste slowly, which some mused might be the silver lining. Fraud forced them to pay attention. In quiet cellars, amid oak and candle smoke, the lesson breathed like the first nose of a great vintage. The story in the glass matters, but only if the story is true. London's financial district can feel like clockwork, glass, steel, and coffee murmurs, but in early 2009 a new rhythm pulsed through Bishopsgate. Traders spoke of carbon credits, those digital chits that let factories offset smoke with planted forests. Into this excitement stepped Helios Commodities, a tiny brokerage run by Andrew Sinclair, a 30-something with cufflinks shaped like wind turbines and a talent for borrowing confidence from thin air. Sinclair rented a corner office high above Liverpool Street Station, outfitting it with bamboo floors and potted saplings to underscore his green credentials. He told visitors Helios made the planet breathable, one trade at a time, yet the real oxygen came from Europe's freshly launched emissions trading scheme. Credits moved fast, prices jumped like sparks, and, crucially, carbon allowances were exempt from customs checks. Sinclair courted small industrial firms that had no wish to navigate arcane registries. Let Helios handle the paperwork, he'd say, sliding term sheets across recycled paper folders. Clients wired funds, Helios wired back allowances, and statements glowed with tidy profits. Behind the scenes, however, Sinclair had discovered a loophole as old as European borders: value-added tax. Buy credits in France at 0% VAT, transfer them across the channel, sell to a British buyer with 17.5% VAT, then vanish the tax portion before revenue and customs could collect. He called it the carousel. Credits spun from Paris to London to Rotterdam, each cycle generating a fresh slice of unpaid VAT. Sinclair enlisted accomplices, shell companies registered to vacant flats in Croydon, directors named after Shakespearean characters, to play middlemen. Money moved in Friday afternoon bursts. £10 million for credits in, £11.75 million out. The extra £1.75 million skimmed to a Latvian bank account and onward to Dubai. By Monday morning the shell company dissolved, replaced by another ready for the next spin. For months, alarms stayed silent. Carbon trading was new, tax inspectors still learning its jargon. Helios sponsored eco-conferences, placing Sinclair on panels beside earnest climatologists. He donated to tree-planting charities and mailed glossy brochures of rainforests at dawn. Investors, lulled by moral glow, doubled their stakes. A junior analyst at a Midland steelworks nicknamed Sinclair St. Carbon. The first crack sounded in a fluorescent basement at HMRC's Fraud Investigation Service, where analyst Priya Deshpande compared VAT receipts from energy products. She noticed carbon credit imports had exploded from £20 million to nearly £2 billion in under a year, yet VAT remittances lagged by tens of millions. Patterns of Friday purchases and Monday dissolutions formed a breadcrumb spiral directing her straight toward Helios. Deshpande flagged the anomaly to her supervisor, who approved a discreet shadow audit. HMRC traced IP logins to Helios accounts and found most originated not in London but from a laptop pinging routers in a Dubai marina. Court orders followed, freezing 15 UK bank accounts moments after Friday's carousel spin. Sinclair arrived Monday to discover his screens locked and 2 investigators waiting, badges visible but voices calm. He tried bravado, claiming a temporary systems review, but the officers recited account numbers and shell company names with forensic certainty. Sinclair's shoulders slumped. He asked for a glass of water. While he sipped, HMRC technicians cloned his hard drive, capturing emails that read like a heist diary, subject lines fresh horses, spin faster, and chillingly, trees don't testify. News broke that afternoon under headlines screaming carbon credit con clients felt whiplash. The planet-saving wunderkind now accused of siphoning £80 million from the Treasury. One factory manager confessed to reporters he made paying tax sound almost unethical. Parliament demanded answers. Environmental groups groaned that climate policy had become tabloid fodder. During the trial at Southwark Crown Court, prosecutors unfolded the scheme like a map. They displayed flowcharts where carbon allowances hopped borders in seconds, each hop minting unpaid VAT. Deshpande testified, her voice steady, explaining how she followed digital exhaust through 7 countries. Defense counsel argued the rules were confusing, but emails revealed intent. One message to a partner read, "Faster turnover equals more VAT to pocket before Brussels wakes up." Jurors needed 5 hours to convict Sinclair of conspiracy to cheat public revenue and money laundering. The judge, noting the damage to both coffers and climate policy credibility, imposed a 14-year sentence and ordered repayment of £55 million, every recoverable pound. Confiscation teams auctioned his bamboo-floored office, seized Dubai accounts, and even repossessed the wind turbine cufflinks, which sold online for £42. Helios collapsed, leaving a cautionary aftertaste. Regulators fast-tracked reforms, adding real-time VAT verification to carbon trades. Priya Deshpande received a quiet commendation and returned to her spreadsheets, hunting the next odd rhythm. Meanwhile, factories still buy and sell carbon credits, but compliance officers now pause at every Friday transfer, remembering the carousel that spun too fast. On Bishopsgate, the office lights where Helios once glowed are dark. The bamboo floor is gone, replaced by neutral carpet awaiting a new tenant with fresh promises. And when London's traders gather for coffee at dawn, they sometimes lift mugs toward the window, joking about credits and cufflinks, then grow sober, recalling that saving the planet needn't involve sleight of hand, just honest numbers and taxes duly paid. Dr. Calvin Rowe opened Sunset Longevity Institute on a palm-lined stretch of Beverly Hills where boutiques sold diamond collars for dogs and valet drivers never idled a Prius. His clinic, painted in creamy neutrals and scented with eucalyptus, promised age reversal medicine to executives and celebrities who feared gray hair more than quarterly losses. Rowe spoke softly, wore navy scrubs stitched with his initials, and displayed framed articles from wellness magazines praising his revolutionary peptide therapy. Patients paid steep monthly retainers for personalized 4 drips, DNA panels, and snippets of advice about sleep hygiene. Hidden behind the spa atmosphere, however, was the real profit engine, a torrent of insurance claims for procedures that never happened. Rowe hired coders who once billed oncology units. They knew the richest CPT codes by heart. A 10-minute vitamin injection transformed, on paper, into a complex regenerative musculoskeletal infusion. A quick B12 shot became autologous stem cell harvest. Insurers reimbursed tens of thousands per session, no questions asked, because Rowe submitted immaculate paperwork, charts filled with vitals, diagnostic images, and physician signatures replicated by an AI-driven handwriting font. For 2 years the scheme glided over sunset boulevards. Rowe bought a glass house above Mulholland Drive, a 36-foot Van Dutch motorboat, and a silent partner share in a minor league basketball team. He told friends the money came from concierge longevity packages. At staff meetings he demanded white glove service. Patients' lattes frothed to precisely 148 degrees Fahrenheit, lobby music capped at 42 decibels, scented candles replaced every 3 hours. The Serenity masked a frantic back office where coders raced to file claims before Friday cutoff. Suspicion surfaced from an unexpected quarter. Blue Horizon Health, a mid-sized insurer with a new data analytics unit. Analyst Rosa Delgado noticed that Sunset Longevity's reimbursements for regenerative procedures had spiked from $180,000 in one quarter to $9.4 million the next, yet the clinic did not report any postoperative infections, a statistical impossibility. She dug deeper and found odd patterns. Patients ranged from Hollywood agents to retired surfers, yet every file contained the same trio of ICD-10 codes, copied down to the comma. Delgado forwarded her findings to the Special Investigations Unit, SIU. SIU investigator Marcus Trent scheduled an undercover appointment, posing as a talent agency lawyer. Inside Sunset Longevity he received a glossy intake form heavy on well-being goals, but light on medical history. A nurse offered a lavender-infused neck pillow while Rowe extolled a 4 blend of NAD+, magnesium, and telomerase primers. Trent agreed to the $2,000 out-of-pocket fee and handed over his insurance card. Within a week Blue Horizon logged a $48,000 claim for a cellular orthobiologic transplant, supposedly performed during that single 4-session. Armed with evidence, SIU tipped off the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, Office of Inspector General, HHSOIG. Agents opened a quiet probe, subpoenaing payer data from 6 insurers. The aggregated spreadsheet revealed $112 million in reimbursements to Sunset Longevity across 26 months, numbers rivaling regional trauma centers. Rowe sensed trouble when 2 insurers abruptly denied new claims, citing medical necessity review. He convened an emergency Zoom with billing staff, instructing them to diversify codes and slow submissions. He also hired a former compliance officer, paying triple market rate, to draft retroactive consent forms. The patchwork came too late. At dawn on a crisp February Thursday, federal agents wearing windbreakers marked OIG knocked on the clinic's frosted glass doors. Receptionists buzzed them in, assuming they were early UPS couriers. Inside, agents served a search warrant and secured hard drives, cloud credentials, and 2 shredders still warm to the touch. Rowe emerged from his private office, spa music still lilting overhead, and attempted calm. "Gentlemen, this must be a misunderstanding." An agent answered by citing 18 U.S.C. Section 1347, healthcare fraud. Rowe's jaw tightened. He asked for his lawyer. News cameras gathered before noon, capturing patients in athleisure were leaving with half-finished smoothies. Indictments unsealed the next morning listed healthcare fraud, aggravated identity theft, and money laundering. Prosecutors alleged Rowe billed for 6,400 non-existent stem cell procedures and rerouted insurer funds through shell LLCs named after Greek gods, Athena Wellness Holdings, Helios Ventures, and Nix Horizons, before wiring profits to an account in the Cayman Islands. During trial in downtown Los Angeles, jurors watched animated charts tracing claim IDs through bank nodes to the Van Dutch purchase. Former coders testified, some tearful, admitting they were instructed to upcode until it sings. A celebrity client explained she never received stem cell therapy, just a saline drip and affirmations about mindfulness. The defense argued that regenerative medicine lacked standardized billing language, but prosecutors displayed side-by-side images. Rowe's scans were stock photos lifted from a German orthopedic journal. After 6 days of deliberation, the jury returned guilty on all counts. The judge, calling the scheme opulence built on hollow medicine, sentenced Rowe to 18 years in federal prison and ordered $87 million in restitution. The Van Dutch was auctioned to a tech executive. The glass house now lists for rent, its infinity pool overlooking a city Rowe will view only through razor-wired windows. Blue Horizon promoted Delgado to Director of Analytics. Her algorithms are now industry standard for anomaly detection. Clinics across California hurried to audit their billing, fearful of candle-scented back offices harboring hidden fraud. Beverly Hills still pulses with wellness fads, cryotherapy pods, hyperbaric lounges, but Sunset Longevity's sign has been removed, leaving faint outlines on cream stucco. Passers-by sometimes pause, recalling eucalyptus air and whispered promises of eternal youth, then walk on under stark California sun, reminded that no foredrip is as rejuvenating as the truth. For years, travelers landing at Munich's gleaming airport passed a modest billboard featuring a single word, Wirecard, in soft cobalt letters. Few outsiders knew what the company did, yet locals spoke of it as Bavaria's answer to Silicon Valley, an online payment star that promised to make cash obsolete. At its headquarters in the suburb of Ascium, glass walls reflected endless sky, and the founder-chief executive, Marcus Braun, strode the corridors in black turtlenecks, quoting Steve Jobs and promising a cashless tomorrow. Investors believed him so completely that Wirecard's market value eclipsed that of Deutsche Bank. Inside conference rooms scented with espresso, Braun explained Wirecard's magic as simple plumbing. The firm slipped between shoppers and merchants, shuttling credit card charges around the world. But his presentations leapt from modest numbers to shimmering forecasts. Revenues in Asia doubling every year, profits in Dubai outpacing expectations, a gold rush of digital wallets from Manila to Mumbai. Analysts who questioned details received dense spreadsheets and polite reminders about confidential merchant agreements. The mystery only amplified the allure. Yet the figures concealed a hollow core. Some of Wirecard's third-party partners were no more than rented mailboxes in Manila or Singapore, and the billions in cash supposedly parked in Philippine banks existed only as PDF statements conjured by a trusted lieutenant. The illusion began as a patch, a quick fix to disguise a bad quarter, then grew into a scaffolding that propped the entire empire. By the time the company joined Germany's prestigious DAX index in 2018, a portion of its stated earnings was vapor. The first tremor arrived in the newsroom of the Financial Times. Reporter Dan McCrum received a tip that Wirecard's Asian revenues were overstated. He asked for on-the-record sources, got none, but curiosity took root. McCrum combed filings, noting leaps in cash balances that never matched interest income. He published a cautious article. Wirecard's share price wobbled, then recovered after Braun denounced false allegations and hired lawyers who accused McCrum of market manipulation. Meanwhile, a Hong Kong-based accountant named Pav Gill, newly hired by Wirecard's Asia division, discovered invoices backdated and countersigned by executives who were, at the time of signing, on different continents. When he raised concerns, he was told to focus on growth. Gill's discomfort grew into dread. He copied files onto an encrypted thumb drive and, through a tangled web of contacts, reached McCrum. The FT published Gill's documents, spreadsheets that showed circular payment flows, money leaving one Wirecard account in the morning and returning by sunset, masquerading as revenue. Wirecard again pushed back, calling the leaks industrial espionage, and German regulators, wary of short sellers, opened an investigation into the journalists, not the company. The stock rallied. Braun claimed vindication. But numbers quietly refused to be bullied. KPMG accepted an engagement to perform an independent audit. Their team requested simple proof. Account statements from 2 Philippine banks showing 1.9 billion euros in cash. Wirecard supplied glossy scans with barcode headers. Auditors asked the banks for verification. Both institutions replied that no such accounts existed. News of the missing billions reached Braun as he prepared for a video earnings call. He postponed, citing documentation delays. Over one tense weekend, the board demanded answers. Braun assured them the money would be confirmed within hours. Monday arrived with no confirmation. That afternoon, the company issued a brief statement. Confirmation of 1.9 billion euros in escrow accounts has not yet been achieved. The market read the understatement for what it was. An admission that nearly a quarter of Wirecard's balance sheet had vanished like mist. Shares collapsed 70% in 2 days. Prosecutors descended on the Ascium campus, escorting forensic teams past reception. They imaged servers, seized paper files, and found memos discussing special Southeast Asia structure, followed by nervous strings of ellipses. Braun resigned at dusk, walked out through a side door, and was arrested the next morning for inflating revenues and defrauding creditors. The hunt shifted to his chief operating officer, Jan Marsalek, the man credited with building Wirecard's Asian miracle. Marsalek slipped out of Germany on a private jet, phone switched off. Rumors placed him in Belarus, then Moscow, traveling on passports from countries he had never visited. Interpol issued a red notice, but the trail dissolved into the same haze that once hid Wirecard's profits. In Munich's courtroom E220, Braun appeared behind thick glass, still in a black turtleneck but visibly smaller, as if the fabric now wore him. Prosecutors outlined a simple arithmetic: fictitious customers, forged bank letters, and a debt pile built on phantom earnings. Bondholders testified that they trusted Germany's regulatory reputation. Pension funds admitted they bought shares for their supposed stability. After months of hearings, the court convicted Braun of fraud, market manipulation, and accounting crimes, sentencing him to 13 years. Asset recovery teams clawed back luxury properties and frozen stock options, but creditors still faced billions in losses. The DAX quietly replaced Wirecard with a more prosaic company that sold flavorings for ice cream, a humbler sort of sweetness. In Ascium, Wirecard's glass headquarters remains, windows reflecting Bavarian clouds. A new tenant removed the logo, yet faint outlines linger, letters of air where certainty once seemed solid. Travelers at Munich airport now pass blank signboards, perhaps noticing the absence more than they ever noticed the name. And in newsrooms, auditors' offices, and small investor clubs across Europe, people repeat Wirecard's cautionary refrain: trust is not a figure on a balance sheet. It is a light, and any shadow, however small, can eclipse it. Sunny mornings in Palo Alto often smell of jasmine and wet pavement, but inside the glass walls of Edison Laboratories the air smelled only of ambition. Investors, reporters, and retired generals crowded the lobby, waiting for a glimpse of its founder, Helena Pierce, a 29-year-old who wore black turtlenecks and spoke in a velvet baritone about democratizing healthcare. Her promise was radical. A single fingerstick of blood, no bigger than a raindrop, could replace the vials traditionally drawn from a patient's vein. Tiny desktop analyzers, mirage boxes, she called them, would soon sit in every pharmacy from Seattle to Sarasota. Pierce's origin story glimmered. She had dropped out of Stanford's biomedical engineering program after her uncle died from a chemotherapy overdose. Laboratories were slow, she claimed, and dosage errors killed. Investors nodded, checkbooks opened. A former Secretary of State joined the board. A grocery store chain signed a nationwide deployment contract. In glossy magazines, Pierce's pale face appeared beside headlines like the next Steve Jobs of medicine. Inside Edison's R&D wing, however, the Mirage box was more puzzle than product. Engineers fought physics. Molecules needed space, and Pierce insisted the device remain the size of a toaster. Early prototypes leaked, overheated, or produced wildly inconsistent readings. When senior biochemist Raj Patel warned that dilution protocols skewed potassium results, Pierce asked him to focus on the vision, not the variance. She authorized cosmetic fixes, extra LED lights, a sleeker chassis, and scheduled an unveiling at the annual Desert Health Summit in Scottsdale, Arizona. The summit hall smelled of citrus and new carpeting when Pierce strode onto stage. She held up a cartridge the size of a thumb drive. "This," she declared, "will end the age of fear at the phlebotomy chair." A volunteer from the audience, a local news anchor, offered her finger. The drop of blood disappeared into the Mirage box. Moments later, the flat panel screen behind Pierce displayed a full metabolic panel. Glucose, electrolytes, liver enzymes, all normal and color-coded. Applause thundered. Pre-orders tripled overnight. What the audience didn't know was that a lab tech backstage had loaded pre-written results keyed to the anchor's name. The Mirage box on stage wasn't connected to anything but a hidden laptop running a slide deck. Pierce called it a demo assist, convinced that real performance would catch up before anyone noticed. Suspicion began in a fluorescent cubicle at the Food and Drug Administration. Analyst Dana Morales reviewed Edison's sparse validation packets and saw red flags. Studies with sample sizes of 4, references to proprietary statistical smoothing, and no external control data. She requested raw output files. Edison's regulatory liaison sent PDFs that turned out to be scans of spreadsheets, their original cells inaccessible. Morales asked again. Weeks passed, emails went unanswered. Meanwhile, in Phoenix, pharmacist Miguel Alvarez oversaw the first Mirage box installed inside a supermarket clinic. Patients arrived, eager to avoid needles. The device whirred, lights danced, and printouts emerged with cheerful graphics. Yet a frail diabetic man fainted 2 days later. Hospital labs showed glucose levels double what the Mirage had reported. Alvarez filed an incident report. 2 more discrepancies followed. He phoned Edison's support line. A recorded voice thanked him for believing in the future. Back in Palo Alto, engineer Patel decided he was finished polishing illusions. He copied calibration logs onto a thumb drive, each file showing error rates of 50% or more. One night he met Wall Street Journal reporter Elena Zhou at a quiet Mountain View cafe. Over herbal tea, Patel explained how the Mirage often kicked samples it couldn't read to a traditional analyzer hidden in a certified lab. Voiding the point of the whole enterprise, he said with a tired shrug. Zhou listened, recorder tucked beneath her scarf. Her first article landed like a thunderclap. Blood, sweat, and errors inside Edison Labs. Pierce responded on CNBC, labeling the story misleading, and claimed Patel was a disgruntled employee who lacked the imagination to change the world. She hired litigators known for aggressive cease and desist letters and doubled down on publicity, booking a TED Talk titled "Trusting in the Drop." But numbers kept whispering. Hospitals comparing Edison results with their own noted mismatches. The grocery store chain quietly suspended its rollout. The FDA issued a formal warning letter, citing significant inaccuracies and barring interstate transport of Mirage cartridges. Investors grew skittish. Stock options once deemed golden spun toward tin. Pierce summoned loyalty meetings, urging staff to walk through the storm. Yet a subpoena from the U.S. Attorney's Office arrived the same week as her Forbes cover hit newsstands. Federal agents raided Edison's headquarters at dawn, collecting servers, email archives, and the stage prop used in Scottsdale. They found memos instructing lab personnel to delete run logs older than 48 hours, and spreadsheets itemizing payments to private investigation firms hired to shadow whistleblowers. The trial unfolded in San Jose's federal courthouse under bright LEDs that flattened every expression. Prosecutors played backstage video of the Scottsdale demo, showing the lab tech sliding fake results into the system. Pierce, coiffed yet gaunt, stared ahead. Patel testified, voice steady, about potassium spikes mislabeled as printer jams. Alvarez spoke of the diabetic patient, his hands trembling slightly. The defense argued that iterative innovation always looks messy, but jurors saw something simpler: deceit packaged as disruption. After 11 days of deliberation, they returned guilty verdicts on wire fraud and conspiracy to commit healthcare fraud. At sentencing, the judge called Pierce's actions a reckless gamble with human lives, imposing 17 years in federal prison and restitution of $500 million to investors and affected patients. As marshals led her away, Pierce glanced back only once, eyes scanning a room that no longer believed in miracles. Edison Laboratories filed for bankruptcy. The glass walls now display for lease signs. In the Phoenix supermarket clinic, the Mirage box is gone, replaced by an ordinary centrifuge, and a phlebotomist who tells jokes to nervous customers while filling real vials. Dana Morales at the FDA trains new analysts, beginning each lecture with Pierce's once famous slide of a single blood drop. Small, she says, can still be dangerous. In Silicon Valley cafes where venture capitalists sketch the next big pitch, someone inevitably mentions Edison, and the room grows thoughtful. They sip espressos, remembering that progress is priceless but trust is fragile, as delicate as a drop of blood glistening on a fingertip, easy to smear, impossible to gather once it falls.